Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the February 3rd, 2022 State Board of Education meeting. I'm Eric Davis, Chair of the Board, and I call this meeting to order. A welcome to all board members, advisors, staff, on-site visitors, online listeners, and Twitter followers. And remember, you can follow the NC State Board of Education on Twitter at EDStateBoard_NC. You can also view all meeting materials and follow the meeting online. I remind our audience and those listening that this body meets monthly with its official meeting scheduled for the first Thursday of the month. Committee meetings were held on Wednesday prior to the official meeting day when the board met to discuss its committee agenda items. Our February agenda was approved yesterday, so we'll proceed under that approved agenda. Board members, you're reminded that it's our duty to avoid conflicts of interest and the appearance of conflicts of interest as we handle the work of this board. Does any member of the board know of any conflict of interest or any appearance of conflict with respect to any matters coming before us at this meeting? If so, please state them for the record, and if during the course of the meeting you become aware of an actual or apparent conflict of interest, please bring the matter to the attention of the chair. It will then be your duty to abstain from participating in discussion on the matter and from voting on the matter. This time I ask my colleague, Ms. Jill Kamnitz, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance. Ms. Kamnitz.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. We now come to our special recognitions, a time on our agenda when we recognize significant awards, proclamations, resolutions, and particularly those who make a difference in the lives of the public school students we serve each day. At this time, I'll turn to Dr. Mary Hemphill Joseph to lead the special recognitions for School Counseling Week.
Good morning, and thank you, Chair Davis, esteemed members of the board, State Superintendent Truitt, and all those assembled. I am honored today to bring recognition to School Counseling Week, which happens on the first full week of February each year. I can't think of a better time in history to uplift this special profession. This, in terms of thinking about our counselors, one of the biggest things that they have done for us over the past iterative 3 years is helping us reduce learning barriers for students to ensure access across our state. In the Division of Academic Standards, we are extremely proud that we support and uplift the academic and non-academic professionals who support this work each day. And so today we are very, very excited to announce that we are going to be honoring all of the school counselors across the state of North Carolina who have been serving our 1.6 million students. Not only are school counselors able to assess the learning needs, but they are pivotal in connecting parents and families and communities with the necessary resources to ensure that our students are successful. We're even more excited because one of the individuals that we will be honoring today has worked tirelessly to ensure that the North Carolina Diamond Award for Counseling will be in our state for the first time since its inception and has been aligned nationally to the professional standards of counseling as well as to local components as well as other resources to be able to help our students. And now, without further ado, I'd like to invite Ms. Cynthia Floyd up with me as well. Today we are honoring Ms. Cynthia Floyd, who after 29 years of service to the public schools of North Carolina have truly been a consummate professional when it comes to exemplifying and modeling what it means to be a true school counselor. Ms. Cynthia Floyd has truly been an asset not only to the Division of Academic Standards, but across the state. She has been elevated and recognized as a beacon in her field. Ms. Cynthia Floyd has worked tirelessly with external stakeholders to ensure that they understand the realities of what our students are facing. She has not only worked with all 8 districts and all 8 regions across our state, but she has worked tirelessly with district leaders and with school leaders and teacher leaders so that they understand not only the services provided by her department, but she herself has countlessly spent hours on the phone, on Zoom, and during school visits over the course of her career to ensure that the resources needed for students have always been there. In her multiple capacities across the state, she has been hailed not only as a consummate professional, but also when it comes to the cost of caring. She has truly set the bar for what it means to show up for students and to equip the adults that care for them. And so on today, Ms. Cynthia Floyd, while we are going to miss you greatly, we thank you so much for caring not only for the individuals within our department, but also across the state. You have been a lighthouse to those who have truly tried to tap in to ensure that students have what they need, but you have also taken care of the adult needs for almost 3 decades. And we thank you and we're grateful. There's not going to be an individual who can fill your shoes. However, we just thank you so much for setting the bar for what it means to not only take care of the academic needs, but the non-academic needs of students across our state. So thank you for your service. Thank you so much for allowing us the opportunity to work alongside you.
Oh, y'all know how to get a girl choked up first thing in the morning. It's funny when you hear somebody kind of recap part of your career. It's hard to believe that it was about 15 years ago that I stood at this podium and introduced what an awesome team of professionals had created as our revised school counselor job description, aligned with national best practices that were research-based. No, I have not been at DPI for the last 15 years. I left and came back 8 years ago. I had brown hair when I came back 8 years ago. But as Dr. Hemphill Joseph alluded to, and one of my regrets is that I won't get to work more with her and Dr. Christie Day. I didn't get to work with you all long enough. As she alluded to, this job's never been about me. I think any good educator knows the job is not about you. So one of the things I want to do, since today's not going to be any different, somebody out there's thinking, who gave that woman a microphone? I want to thank you. Oh my gosh, you on a daily basis, people just know about the monthly meetings, but so much goes on behind the scenes that I'm sure I don't even have an inkling of an idea. And during a pandemic, when you have been scrutinized even more so than ever, you keep coming to this table and doing what's best for kids. And I really want to thank you so much for doing that. And everyone in this agency, in addition to the board, for doing that. Because you are truly making a huge difference in the lives of students. I also want to thank my colleagues in DPI. Please don't ever forget, you have got some of the most talented, dedicated, passionate staff in this agency. They were hired for a reason. There's probably very few questions you could ask in these meetings that you don't have a staff member that could answer. And I can tell you from personal experience, because a lot of the consultants sit at our desk and keep working while we listen to state board meetings, and one of you will raise a question like, oh, I wish I was there, I've got the answer. We do it all the time, so, oh, I wish they'd ask me. So don't hesitate to ask your staff. There's probably not a question about school counseling you could come up with that I couldn't answer. So please keep that in mind. The answers are in this agency. Give them the opportunity, and they can bring, and if they can't bring you the answer, they can find somebody who can. Also, in listening to those meetings from our desk, I've heard you bring in some awesome professionals, agencies, organizations, great folks to bring you information to help inform your decisions. And I found myself frequently thinking, you know, I just had a district leader tell me that same thing a couple of months ago, or I had school counselors tell me that same thing, that y'all brought in some professionals to tell you, and our folks in our schools have the answers too. And I know that we have school counselors and district leaders that would love the opportunity to come speak to you about what comprehensive school counseling and other specialized instructional support look like, and the questions that you might have. I think it's been even more confusing right now as people have tried to figure out, well, what's the difference between a school counselor and a school social worker and a school psychologist. And before I retired, I made sure it made it to the web. If you go to DPI, Specialized Instructional Support page, there are now documents that help you understand those differences, because they're an awesome team together, but they do not do each other's jobs. They do share a shared barrier that is also shared by school administrators. And you can find that documented as well on the school counseling policy and legislation page, because over 1,000 school counselors participated in a survey from a 2019 legislation that directed us to report to the General Assembly the difference between school counselor job description and school psychologist job description and what they were actually doing. Like I say, over 1,000 school counselors participated in an online survey that had a quick turnaround. That was an awesome response rate. We only have a little over 4,000 school counselors in the state. And the barrier that they cited most, like I say, they share it with other specialized instructional support, and it's also a barrier for our school administrators, is our school administrators are not being trained on what our specialized instructional support personnel do. We put them in our schools, and like a conductor with an orchestra trying to come up with a perfect symphony, we say, make it all work, everything, but we're not training them on everything. And that was one of the main barriers that they mentioned, was that they were having to try to help educate their administrators on what their effective roles are. Research shows us comprehensive school counseling programs have better student outcomes. So we're doing a disservice to our administrators, and we have some excellent administrators in our schools, by not giving them that extra support in how should you effectively utilize your school counselor, your school social worker, your school psychologist. So I hope over the years we can see that improve, so that school counselors can be spending more of their time in their appropriate roles. I know recently you've been talking about whether or not school counselors should be able to get a master's degree in school administration because they supposedly don't have classroom teaching experience. I can tell you every school counselor is expected to go into the classroom and teach students social emotional learning skills, teach students about career awareness. They're going into the classrooms all the time teaching. We just typically call it classroom guidance, but don't call them a guidance counselor. If you want to see a school counselor cringe, call them a guidance counselor. There is a difference. I won't keep you all day where I could go on all day about the difference between a guidance counselor and a school counselor, but just the tip of the iceberg is that guidance counselors mainly did vocational guidance. They mainly saw students that were college bound or work bound or in trouble, whereas comprehensive school counseling programs now expect school counselors, after they receive their 48 to 60 semester hour master's degree, to serve every single child in that school. Some will only need it school-wide or group-wise, or like I say, classroom instruction. They serve every single child in the school. They can do data-driven programs addressing the social, emotional, mental health, academic, and career needs of every child in the school. If you ever need more information from school counseling, I'm retiring from state employment. I am never going to retire from supporting school counseling. I am happy to come back and help in any way I can. And again, thank you so much for everything you do to support school counseling and other specialized instructional support. Again, I could go on all day, but I know you have an agenda to get back to. And thank you for recognizing me. And as we approach National School Counseling Week, I hope everyone will truly think about what it is we're celebrating. We're celebrating the people that celebrate with children when they overcome an obstacle they didn't think they could overcome, who help elementary and middle school children think about careers, and then help high school kids with getting those credentials or preparation in order to get into careers. The counselors who are there when a child is grieving the loss of someone who died of COVID. They're helping students get ready to learn. The counselor who's having to encourage a child and be there for them after that counselor just called Child Protective Services because that child experienced something no human being should have to experience. Those are the people we're celebrating. And I thank you for recognizing that. Thank you so much. Come back.
You look fabulous.
Thank you so much, Drew.
Do you want to do one with the?
Yeah, we'll go from masters.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much.
Ms. Floyd,
Oh, thank you. Yeah, in y'all's defense, I did just stop coloring, so it's not that it all turned white this fast. I'm sorry.
but we just so appreciate what you've done for our students for 29 years and what you just did for us in the last 5 or 10 minutes. We got a window into how much you care and how much expertise you have and how you use that to help make those around you better. And we're the beneficiaries of your great work, our students in this group assembled today. And there's just not words to express how much we appreciate what you've done for our students and for us throughout 3 decades of service. I'm sure maybe some of my colleagues might want to make comments, but I just wanted to, on behalf of the board and department, tell you how much we appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I am just one school counselor that has that passion. So if y'all truly, school counselors would love to come in here, district directors would love to come in here and give you more information of, I could have gone on for a lot longer, but I do know you have an agenda. So welcome them in. I can help connect you to school council. I can come back if y'all want more information, just let us know.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Ms. White,
can I make just a comment?
please.
I'm reflecting on her comments, and what especially strikes me this morning is that she expressed the idea that our school counselor teams work on behalf of all students. And I think many times we consider our counselors as intervention specialists when we see a student or a child in crisis, that those are the students within the school environment that get the most attention. But I can think of no better time to highlight the attention that our counselors give, because this week an amazing individual jumped to her death from New York City in the skyline. Her name was Chesley Christie. She was the 2019 Miss USA. She was Miss North Carolina USA. She was a standout African-American female athlete at the University of South Carolina. She had a law degree from Wake Forest University. She had every successful thing going for her, but yet she struggled with high-functioning depression. We don't know what's going on in the lives of individuals in this very room, in our schools and in our classrooms, but those individuals who have that counseling background see it each and every day. And the idea that we have those professionals, competent, trained professionals, working on behalf of our students to eliminate those barriers. Mental health is a significant barrier to being successful in the classroom. I can't speak enough for what they do for our students and for our staff each and every day. Every student. Every student.
Thank you, Ms. White.
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hall.
thank you, sir. Certainly, I did the remarks of my fellow board member concerning the role of counselors in our school system. I'm very, very aware of how important they are, and the issue that she spoke about concerning how to use counselors in the public school systems, and hopefully we will get over that barrier at some point. But my comment is this: I want to thank Mrs. Floyd for correcting me. After all these years, I've always said guidance counselors. After all these years, now I know that I was recognizing people in a not a professional manner, and they are called school counselors. And one of my best friends is a school counselor from here on out. And I hope to see her this week and let her know that I apologize for not recognizing her as a school counselor and not a guidance counselor. And I want to thank Ms. Floyd for her years of service and all that she has done for the 1.6 million K-12 students in the state of North Carolina. Thank you, Ms. Floyd, and may you have a wonderful, wonderful retirement.
Thank you, Mr. Hall. Vice Chair Duncan.
I just want to say thank you for your remarks, your closing remarks, if you will. You know, frequently retirement ceremonies are wonderful because you celebrate the great career that someone has, and you turn it into an educational experience for everyone else, so we're particularly appreciative. We need the education. We're very happy to get it from the best. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Ms. Floyd, you've given us gifts for 29 years, and today you gave us another one, so thank you so much. Appreciate it. Best wishes. Before we transition to our superintendent's report, I would like to thank our colleague, Mr. Todd Chastain, for his service on the board. Todd recently announced his resignation, but we appreciate the time he gave serving our North Carolina public schools and the students in those schools in his role as a board member, and we wish him the best, and we look forward to formally recognizing and thanking him for his service at a later date. So thank you, Mr. Chastain. I now turn to our superintendent for your superintendent's report.
Thank you, Chair Davis. So last month, many of you heard me say that 2022 will be the year of the workforce. And I meant that in the sense of it's in the news every day how this pandemic has, at least for the foreseeable future, changed the nature of work in our country and in our state. But it's also always been a part of my plan in seeking this office and holding this office to ensure that our schools are doing everything they can and have what they need to prepare all students for the post-secondary plans of their choice, and that they can be successful in the plans of their choice. And so, one of the first things that I did was create and then hire someone to fill a position who would come from the private sector and be able to advise me on matters of workforce engagement. And Ms. Christie Van Auken is in the audience right now. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So why now is a great question. Well, we know that the pandemic has changed the nature of work forever. We know that from the reports that we saw yesterday, from the amazing work that's going on with College Career Promise, our cooperative innovative high schools, CTE, that North Carolina is poised to be able to ensure that we are meeting our workforce demands. But our data, and I'm going to share a little bit about this in a minute, our data suggests that we're not doing that. We're not meeting our workforce demands, and we're not preparing all students as best as we can. And much of that is because educators are working and must work in the system that we have. And so we're going to need to change the system some. National Jobs Report shows us that hundreds of thousands of jobs are added to the market each month that go unfilled. And the latest estimates are that 50,000 IT jobs just in North Carolina alone will go unfilled this year. We, in response to this pre-pandemic, of course, created My Future NC, because our data from the Lumina Foundation in conjunction with Carolina Demography proved that while we have normally been able to meet our workforce demand because we are a place that people from other states want to come and live, that's no longer enough to meet the growing demands of our economy. And this is why My Future NC exists, is to set a goal knowing that 67% of jobs are going to require some post-secondary education, we need to make sure that we are preparing students to be successful, because education is still the surest pathway to either the middle class, economic freedom, prosperity, however you want to define it. Education is supposed to be the leveler. Unfortunately, despite having an 87% high school graduation rate, which, by the way, stayed the same during the pandemic, which is absolutely incredible and a testament to our teachers' hard work and the benefits of summer extension learning, where we saw students graduate from high school because they had the opportunity to extend to do summer extension learning. Only 31% of our students graduate every year and attain a post-secondary credential of marketplace value by the time they are 24. Only 31%. So trends that are exacerbating this issue are the Great Resignation, a shrinking talent pipeline, not just in education and not enough folks wanting to become teachers, but across multiple industries. Automation and AI driving change, especially for lower wage job sectors. Think about if you know someone who lost a job due to automation or AI. This is why economists say that we have a mismatch right now. We've got job openings, but we don't have people with the right skills and credentials to fill those jobs. Last week, the Hechinger report claimed, and there's a link here for you to take a look at another time, that another 1 million adults have stepped off the path to the middle class due to their inability to pursue post-secondary credentials. So let's look at some numbers here. The fastest growing jobs in our nation require a post-secondary degree or non-degree credential. The growth of jobs requiring a non-degree credential or post-secondary degree is projected to outpace total job growth. That was true before the pandemic. 2 out of 3 jobs in our state require education after high school, yet less than half of North Carolinians have the level of education required. And finally, individuals with a credential or college degree make as much as 2 to 3 times more than someone with just a high school diploma or with less than 15 years of graduation. So we know that this is about not just college degrees, but also non-degree credentials that are key levers to economic mobility. We've all heard the stories of the kinds of salaries HVAC repairmen, plumbers, welders, solar panel installers, help desk workers, those with IT full stack credentials can make without stepping foot on the campus of a 4-year college. We need to ensure that students know what waits for them when they cross the graduation stage. And we can no longer continue to silo CTE students from 4-year residential college degree seeking students. We know that too many students go off to college needing remediation. We are sending students to college who don't necessarily want to go to college and have other passions and dreams that they want to pursue. And so we must better align what we are preparing students to do with our job sectors that will lead to increased employability and student success. And so here's what we're going to do. Yesterday you heard reports, slide 8 please. Yesterday you heard reports about our CTE credentials and about our cooperative and innovative high schools and the work that they are doing. And I mentioned to you all that we need to make sure that when we are offering CTE credentials, that we are doing so equitably. And due to workforce needs and barriers in more of our remote areas, we need to make sure that we're leveraging all the tools at our disposal to ensure that all students have access to those CTE credentials that will lead to a career of marketplace value, or a credential of marketplace value. So I will be working with Trey Michael and his team and Christie Van Auken to ensure that what we're first of all, we need to know the landscape. What are we offering and where? Where are the gaps? We heard Ms. Cross tell us yesterday afternoon that in some cases, it looks as though students are not taking relevant credentials because they are a stepping stone to a more relevant credential. So we need to get our eyes on that. We need to be aware of what our state's workforce needs are. I mentioned IT earlier, but we need more nurses, we need more CNAs who can get on a pathway to become an RN, and then eventually an RN with a BSN. Agriculture is still the largest industry in our state, and supplies lots of jobs that are not just what we think of as typical farming jobs. We have a manufacturing shortage. Manufacturing is a complicated endeavor now that requires a certain level of math and reading proficiency that we need to ensure that students have. We've lifted up to you over the last few months examples of districts that are doing a great job at this. We visited The Rock in Charlotte, which serves 3 high schools within CMS. We shared about the amazing summer internship that students in high school got paid for in Halifax County, learning to be solar panel installers. And they also have another program preparing students for what's called a help desk credential. McDowell County with their public safety work, and the list goes on. We actually have a part out in the eastern part of our state, a multi-county workforce skills-based center that serves students from multiple counties, where they can get all kinds of credentials that actually lead to a job. We're continuing to listen to our superintendents, teachers, principals, and students to help shape this workforce strategy. And finally, we need to crosswalk the goals with economic development, business, and post-secondary school leaders to make sure that we're on the right track. So that said, here are the 4 workforce goals that have been launched. We need to make sure that we're preparing the future workforce with the skills and experiences required to be successful citizens. We must ensure that all students have access to post-secondary pathways that align with growing high-wage careers, which means we can't look at a small rural county and say, well, you only get to take CPR. We need to assist all students and parents in making informed plans and decisions. Part of, every parent wants their child to be successful. And if they are laser focused on believing that there's one pathway to success for their child, then that child might miss out on something that they really want to pursue. And we need to ensure that all students engage in career exploration and real-world learning activities throughout their K-12 journey. Let's go to slide 11. And to that end, last week, I had the honor of partnering with Gary Salamito, who's the president and CEO of the North Carolina State Chamber, who engaged in a workforce webinar moderated by Mebin Rash from EdNC. Next slide, please. The title of which was How K-12 Education Fuels North Carolina's Competitive Success. So it was very, very well attended. It was almost their highest attended webinar ever. This is a topic that people are interested in. We had an amazing set of questions that really showed the Chamber's unique position in knowing what our employers are facing right now. And then we met with about 5 different media outlets afterwards to answer their questions. So we had a lot of discussions about nccareers.org, College and Career Promise, and one opportunity that I'd like to highlight specifically, and that is the North Carolina Business Committee for Education, which resides in the governor's office, has partnered with DPI to offer those initial stack IT credentials. We're very close to making it free for all students. It's very low cost, but we're gonna make it free. And so students just need to go to NCBCE's website and to start taking these courses. Let's go to the next slide. So on our website, we have included all kinds of links and identified our partners in this work. We just launched it in January, and there will be more to come. And we will continue to highlight districts that are serving their students in this way. So the hashtag Now What for this work, it begins with the portrait of a graduate. I mentioned before that teachers can only do their work in the system that they have to do it in. And so a lot of the barriers have to do with our testing and accountability model. And so what my team is doing and what this board has approved is a partnership with a vendor who is facilitating community stakeholder discussions in all of our 8 state education regions that will help us hone in on the regional differences that we have as well as the similarities, and then come up with a non-academic approach to defining what we want students, or what we're promising we're going to give students when they graduate from high school. What does that high school diploma mean if someone can't pursue the post-secondary plans of their choice? Or even worse, what does it mean when only 31% of our students obtain a credential of marketplace value after graduation? And so we need, for our school accountability model, to not just focus on high stakes end of grade testing at a weighting of 80% versus 20% growth, but we need to have a multiple measures approach to school testing and accountability in both our state and federal model that prioritizes how schools are supporting all students be successful after high school. And I believe that in order for teachers to be able to do that, they need to have the freedom to focus on project-based learning and work-based experiences, things that teachers often feel they cannot do because they have to prepare students for a one-and-done test at the end of the year. That, quite frankly, doesn't tell the teacher, the student, or the parent what that child really knows and can do. So January was our kickoff month. In the weeks to come, there will be public opportunities to elevate this conversation. I will be speaking at the annual CTE Directors Conference, which is next week in the Sandhills. Portrait of a Graduate work continues to identify durable skills, things like persistence, help-seeking behaviors, collaboration, critical thinking skills, creativity, all of the long-term skills that we want our employees and our coworkers to have. And we will continue to engage with those in the field to solicit feedback on workforce and K-12 alignment. So I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Superintendent. Questions or comments from my colleagues?
I have a quick question.
Dr. Oxendine.
I'm really fascinated with this portrait of a graduate. I guess I need to do this first.
Yes, Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you so much. I'm really fascinated in the portrait of a graduate. I remember years ago we had in this room a portrait. It was like a stand-up,
It was right over there.
and it was the portrait of a graduate, maybe, I'm not sure. But I wonder if business partners contributed to that portrait. Did they help do it?
Ma'am, so the portrait isn't finished yet, and the vendor is working in every single region with faith-based communities, employers, schools, parents, to gather feedback in order to feed into that portrait. And let me be clear, we have districts who already have a portrait of a graduate. We do have a handful, and this is something that other states do as well. This is not a unique idea. And we are honoring and working with those LEAs who already have a portrait of a graduate.
And my other question, I wonder if our high schools, if there's some way that we could gather information, probably the best first source would be from our high schools to learn about what happens to the graduate. Do they go into higher education? Do they go to community colleges? What types of jobs do they enter? I think that would be fascinating.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we're going to do is create a toolkit for our educators, for our school counselors, for principals, and for parents.
To track them immediately.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would add that our aspiration of a North Carolina longitudinal data system will connect across the systems, education systems, and into the workforce, provide a comprehensive view of how our graduates are moving forward into success. Other comments and questions? I believe I heard someone on the line.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you. Superintendent Truitt, my mother was a switchboard operator, and some people refer to her as the front door of where she worked. And in so many respects, you're the front door of K-12 education, and I say that obviously in a complimentary way. From a messaging standpoint, when you talk about these graduation rates, and the citizens are bombarded with the proficiency rates of whether it's white, brown, or black students in terms of in the single digits or below 25% or 48% or something. Do you have any thoughts on how we can reconcile that? Because I believe that when people hear that our high school graduation rates are closer to a body temperature, but these proficiency rates are so horrific that we may lose credibility on what we're trying to do. And it's a very genuine question to see if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Treasurer. So I've said for some time now that we have a diploma integrity problem that is not unique to our state. This is an American problem. When students graduate from high school in really high numbers, but they're not able to be successful in either community college or let me tell you all something. When the biggest barrier to students persisting in community college or a four-year college is remediation. Because students never complete the remediation, they give up hope because it's such a frustrating experience, and they never get to credit-bearing coursework. So that goes back to literacy. And I'm gonna say something that is horrific. But I found out this past week from a legislator that when the corrections committee at the legislature has to start budgeting for how many prison beds they're going to need, guess what metric they're given? 3rd grade reading test scores. That has got to end. And we have taken the steps to end it as quickly as I believe is possible. We've already started training 20,000 teachers in effective, data-driven work that has already started turning things around for children in districts that got out in front of this and had already been doing it. And so I guess the answer to your question is that we have to admit that we have a diploma integrity problem, and that there are, only 23% of kids, so I said 31% get a credential marketplace value, 24% or 23% are getting a 4-year degree by the time they are 24 years old. So this is why we talk about reform in education, because it's not serving all students.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, and you can count me in. Everybody in that room has a story. I was an ICTer, industrial cooperative training. I was on the path of spending my entire life as a blue-collar worker, and but for my ICT experience, a lot of but-fors in my life, I would never be in the position I'm in now, whatever position that happens to be. And so this is not something I read about or get consulted on. This is something I've lived. And so as it relates to this messaging and the proficiency versus the graduation rate, just count me in as someone who will give you the backdrop of both the nurture and the nature that goes into some of this.
Thank you, Mr. Treasurer.
And I would add to the superintendent's comments, Mr. Treasurer, to your question. The superintendent mentioned about the need to reform our accountability and assessment system. The proficiency results we get today are a product of that very system.
That's right.
The noise in the system, the stress, the inequities. It has a lot of positives, but it has some terrific negatives that are affecting our students and not informing our teachers appropriately about how to help our students. So I think in a way your question supports the superintendent's call for reform of our accountability and assessment system.
Yes, sir, because teachers don't get end of grade test results until a month into the summer when their students have already moved on. What's the point?
Other comments or questions?
I have a comment, not necessarily a question, but a comment. Well, maybe it is a question, so let me just go for it. Do we know enough about our high school students when they are about to graduate? Let's say at the 11th grade. Do we know enough about how proficient they are in basic reading skills and comprehension?
So only 50% of high school students pass the biology EOC, the math EOC, and the reading EOC.
So the biology occurs at what, the 10th grade?
9th or 10th grade, depending on when.
Depends on this.
We got our expert right here.
Okay, 9th or 10th grade. The other exam, it seems like, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that by the 11th grade, aren't most students out of the testing cycle, end of grade?
No, by 12th grade, because a lot of them don't take Math 3 until their 11th grade year.
Yeah.
So
Right.
they test in Math 1, Math 3, and then English 2 and biology.
Dr. Oxley, in answer to your question, this is just a narrow view. I'm aware that so many of our superintendents work diligently with their principals to track a student's progress through high school, actually beginning in middle school, and to ensure that students are on a path. We have so many students previously that would fail to graduate out of like missing one credit. And I think one reason why our graduation rate has gone up has been the diligence of our superintendents working with principals and teachers to make sure that students have access to courses, are getting the credits they need, are getting the additional instruction when necessary to catch up, and produce results that aren't reflected in the end of course test, but are reflected in their daily performance in the classroom. So that's just one isolated view in answer to your question. Other comments or questions from the superintendent's report? Okay, well, hearing none, just in support of the superintendent's work, particularly the call to change the system, as well as the participation on the Chamber's call of how K-12 education fuels North Carolina competitive success. Representing one part of the workforce, the education workforce, I would just comment that success in strengthening our total workforce begins with our education workforce, because it's the one that all others depend upon. In fact, education, as you mentioned, is the bedrock of our society, our economic prosperity, and our national security. Educators produce the critical thinkers that create jobs and prepare us to sustain not only North Carolina, but ultimately our nation and the global economy. And so I think it's incumbent upon us, as we're doing all these things that the superintendent called for, which are worthy of our commitment, that we also commit ourselves to continuing to build and strengthen the education workforce. You know, in fact, in 89 of our 100 counties, our local school districts are one of the top 3 employers. And in nearly half our counties, 49, our local school district is the #1 employer. So not only are we producing and need to do better at producing graduates to fill the workforce, but our education workforce is an economic driver in so many of our communities, just the sheer jobs they employ. And so I would add to the superintendent's call that we commit ourselves to elevating the profession of teaching, that we commit to make North Carolina the #1 state to be a teacher, and that we honor all public schools as the economic driver that they are, that brings jobs and prosperity to our communities, both rural and urban, black and white, Republican or Democrat, across all of North Carolina. And that we continue to dedicate ourselves to producing an equitable and effective education system of skilled educators to support our students in pursuing the chosen path of their careers. So thank you for your report.
Thank you for your comments, much appreciated.
We'll now proceed to our regular updates from our one of our most valued partners, and that is the North Carolina Department of Health and Human Services. And understand that we have the pleasure of having Dr. Betsy Tilson to lead that report. Dr. Tilson?
Terrific, thank you. I'm very grateful to be with you all and grateful for the ongoing partnership. I think my update will be fairly brief today, so maybe I can even catch up or get you all ahead of schedule. Just as upfront, we have not made changes to the toolkit in the past month, so I will not be bringing changes today for you to adopt. And I'll be responsive. Go to the next slide. Yeah, I'm going to be responsive to the request that we received from the board for an update on our trends, a vaccination update, and mass distribution. So that's what I'll be going over with you all today. Slide. Terrific. So a little bit of bad news, but good news on the when we move to the next slide. A little bit of good news. So when we look at our level of transmission, COVID across the state and the country, we are still uniformly at very, very, very high levels of transmission. We've talked about in the past that the CDC has tiered different levels of transmission and categorized them as high, substantial, moderate, or low. Those levels of transmission are based on 2 metrics. One is the case rate, cases per 100,000, and the second is the percent positive. And so just as a reminder, the threshold for high levels of transmission is 100 cases per 100,000, and or a percent positive greater than 10. For substantial, the thresholds are a case rate of between 50 and 100 cases per 100,000, and a percent positive between 8 and 9.9%, and then decrease as we go. So based on those metrics and categories, you can see, no, not yet. Go. You can see that the country, except for it looks like three counties in the middle of the country, and all of North Carolina is categorized as a high level of transmission. And I also want to point out that not only are we high level, but we're very high. As I said, the threshold for high level of transmission for case rates by CDC is 100 cases per 100,000. Last week, our average was more than 1,000 cases per 100,000. So we are more than 10 times the threshold for high transmission across the state. So that's the bad news. The good news, I'll keep it, yes, go ahead. The good news is we are moving in the right direction. And again, we look at our 4 key metrics. We know that one metric is imperfect, so we try not to rely just on one metric and look at the constellation of our 4 key metrics to gauge the spread of the virus across the state. And you'll see on the left-hand side, this is our metric having to do with lab-reported cases. We know this is an undercount, but is one of the metrics and trends that we follow. So on the left-hand side, you'll see our daily cases of lab-reported cases. You can see that is sharply coming down. These are our metrics as of Monday when we submitted these slides, and I'm happy to say that the metrics across actually all 4 of our key metrics continue to decline this week. That is very encouraging news. On the bottom left, you will see this is our percent positive. Again, this helps us think, are we seeing a high case rate just because we're testing more or because there's more virus? And when you have a percent positive this high, you also know it is because there's a high level of virus. It's not just testing. Good news, though, is our percent positive is also coming down. Now, again, it is a very, very high level. Our goal is less than 5%. On Monday, we were at 26%. Today, we are down to 22%. So we're going in the right direction, but still very high levels. On the right-hand side, these are metrics that we look at people needing hospital-level care based on their infection. On the top right, you can see this is the percent of people who have come to the emergency department for COVID-like illness. That kind of a reddish, brownish line is this year. And you can see we are higher than historic years, but we are coming down. And then the bottom right is people hospitalized with COVID. And you can see that has stabilized and thankfully is starting to come down as well. Today, our hospitalization number is lower down to 4,556. This is what we call a lagging indicator. Typically, we see the decrease in hospitalizations about 2 to 3 weeks after the decrease in our case report. So we are happy to already starting to see that decrease, and we are hoping to continue to see that decrease. That has been the biggest challenge in this most recent surge, is our hospital capacity has been very, very tight across the state. So we are very happy to start seeing that loosen up. Next slide. Okay, and then also just want to show some of our case rates based on age. And again, these are case rates based on lab-confirmed cases. We do know they're an undercount. But when you see trends, it is very helpful. What you'll see is our children are in that gold line. The 0 to 17 is in that yellow line. And you can see all of our, across all of our age populations, our case rates are coming down, thankfully. And you'll also notice in that royal blue, that is our 65-year-olds and over. And thankfully, they really have maintained the lowest case rate, at least in the most recent surges, likely due to the very, very high vaccination rate in our older population. Next slide. And then just a little bit of a breakdown within our child population. You can see it's broken between our preschool, 0 to 4, 5 to 9, 10 to 14, and 15 to 17. And you can see a decrease across all of our age groups as well, which is great. Our 0 to 4 have historically had the lowest case rate, but we also are finding that they probably have the greatest amount of undercount so more cases than actually lab confirmed. But it is good to see that it's coming down across all of our age groups. And then when we look at our clusters, we have seen our K-12 clusters are those that are in the the green bar, our childcare is in the blue, our higher institutes of higher education in that purple. And so you can see we've had a pretty big increase in our K-12 clusters, but as our case rates are coming down, we are hoping to see the decrease in the clusters as well coming down, especially in our K-12 environment. Now, what's driving this big surge? I had briefed you all last month on this rapid emergence of Omicron. Just wanted to give you some updated data on the percent of the virus that's circulating that is Omicron. We have three different data metrics we can use to track that. On the left-hand side is the actual virus samples that are sequenced in North Carolina labs. We have a network of labs with our state lab, with some university partners, and also with some commercial labs that sequence those samples. There is typically a little bit of a delay in the actual sequencing, which is why you can see it only extends out to that second week in January. Green is Omicron, so you can see of the ones we've sequenced, it's almost exclusively now Omicron. On the right-hand side, you can see this is CDC data. They look at different sequencing from across the country, and then because we know our sequencing data is a little bit lagged, they then, through their different data sources, can project what the on the ground is today. And you can see their projection. Purple is Omicron, that their estimation is in our southeast part of the United States, that is us, that we're about 99 to 100% Omicron, and that's what we're seeing in our actual sequence data as well. And the next slide. This is new data that we haven't brought to you all before, but it is another piece of our surveillance data. It's actually our wastewater surveillance data, that we have networks that surveil our wastewater, and they can actually pick up the virus in the wastewater. We're about 1 year into this in North Carolina. Actually, it has been a leader in our wastewater surveillance. As we move into more of what we call the endemic phase, relying more on our surveillance mechanisms than our lab-confirmed cases, just like we do with other respiratory viruses, this will be a really nice tool in our surveillance toolkit, is our wastewater. And what you'll see is we are able to sequence the samples we get from wastewater. Omicron is red, and you can start seeing in our wastewater, the Omicron started to be introduced mid-December. You can see steady increase, and then as of January 18th, pretty much exclusively what we're seeing in our wastewater. Terrific. The other piece that I wanted to update you on, and you may well know, but with this big surge in our cases with Omicron, we have seen a fairly big shift in several of our counties moving from mask optional, which are exemplified counties in red are mask optional, several moving back to mask required, which is denoted in blue. So you can see on the left-hand side was where we were on January 7th, forgive me, December 7th. And then on the right-hand side, where we are on January 28th. As I know you are aware, there is no statewide mask mandate. We do leave that to our local school boards to make that decision. And you can see several have shifted in January in response to the surge. On the bottom right, you will see the percentage or the number of districts and the percentage of students in public school systems that are in districts requiring either universal face covering or optional face covering. The other thing that I wanted to remind you of is in the end of October, we did give guidance to school boards as to what metrics they may consider, and considering if they would want to move to mask optional and mask required. We updated our FAQ and our toolkit at the end of October. We sent this out to all of our LEAs through DPI, and we also, it was in our briefing deck for you, for your board in the early November briefing that we did. But our recommendation for the school boards and to what metrics they could use was that as long as they were in an area of high or substantial transmission, as I defined in that first slide, if they're in still high and substantial transmission, our recommendation is still to have universal face covering, and then once they drop below substantial, then they could consider moving to optional. So those are the metrics that we have recommended for our school boards, but of course they have autonomy to make that decision based on their local factors. Okay, and a little bit of an update, that's right, on vaccines. One, I always do like to have a little bit of a, updated science corner for you all. And so I wanted to make you aware that in the past 2 weeks, there have now been several studies that have come out that have looked at the effectiveness of vaccines, but with two really important nuances. Some of the prior studies that we had on the effectiveness of vaccine did not include boosters because they were not widespread recommended, or we didn't have widespread uptake of boosters, but also they were more based when Delta was circulating and not Omicron was circulating. And we know that Omicron, there's been a more immune evasion with Omicron. And so these 4 studies have all, again, come out within the past 2 weeks or so, and they do include now more data on booster and also include data during the period of Omicron. And the top 2, what they're looking at was still, although we do know that we certainly know there are people who are fully immunized and boosted still can have post-vaccination infections, especially with Omicron. We are certainly aware of that. But it's still, being fully vaccinated and boosting still decreases your risk of having infection. The first study looked at people who were unvaccinated were 5 times more likely to have a COVID infection. And then the second one looked at the people that had 3 doses, including a booster, their risk of symptomatic infection was reduced by about 2/3 as compared to someone who's unvaccinated. And then the bottom 2, again, give us continuing data that's showing that people, especially with that booster, have very, very high protection from severe illness and hospitalization. That third one looks at a comparison between people without immunocompromised, so high level, 97% protection from people who are not immunocompromised against hospitalization, and then actually still pretty high protection, 88% for people with immunocompromised. And then the bottom again shows similar results as well as protection against needing emergency department visits, urgent care encounters, or hospitalizations for people who've had that full series, including a 3rd dose. So just wanted to make sure you were aware of that updated data. Now, I will also say this has primarily been in adults, and so still then continue to look at data on the protection in children. Right, and that is some national studies and national data. I also wanted to make you aware of some of our own North Carolina hospitalization data. You can find this on our publicly available dashboard in our surveillance report. And this looks at, amongst our people in North Carolina, the top bunch is people who have been hospitalized. And what you'll see is 68% of people unvaccinated, amongst our people hospitalized with COVID, 68% of them are people unvaccinated. A little bit less than 27% are vaccinated with no booster, but only 5% are vaccinated with booster. Similar pattern with people needing ICU care. Only 2.8% of people in North Carolina needing ICU care are those who are vaccinated with boosters. So what we are seeing in North Carolina is very similar to that national landscape. And one reason that one of our key messages is is to get vaccinated. And if you are vaccinated, go ahead and get that booster to get that full protection. On the next slide. So based on that, I was also asked to give an update on the progress of vaccination and where we are in North Carolina. So again, all of this data is all publicly available on our dashboard, so I encourage you to follow along. On the top right, you will see our overall, the percentage of our overall population that have had at least 1 dose or 2 doses. People, as you know, people 5 years and over are eligible for vaccine. And so amongst that population eligible for vaccine, almost 70% have had at least 1 dose, 64% have had 2 doses in our 5 and up. We have a more discrete breakdown based on age. And you can see, again, as I alluded to a little earlier, our 65 and up, and especially our 75 and up, at very, very, very high rates of vaccination. And thankfully, we are seeing that reflected in lower case rates. And then you can see, though, the percentage of the population vaccinated does decrease with age. With our our youngest people who are eligible for vaccine are 5 to 11-year-old. 25% of that population has had at least 1 dose. And I'll compare that on the left-hand side. Our FEMA 4, that is our federal organization of states. That is our southeast states. And you can see that North Carolina does have that highest rate of vaccinations for our youngest population as compared to our other southeast states. So we're very grateful for the support that you've given and for our parents in making that decision. I'll also, though, call note on the bottom right is the percent of people who've had a booster. You can see our 65-year-olds have the highest rates of boosting, which is terrific. But we still have some more work to go on having people who've had the primary series getting boosted. And so that has been a really important part of our messaging and our effort is having people finish that series and get the booster. Okie doke. And then the very last slide is we had talked about last meeting some of the changes in our mask recommendations. And you may have seen that CDC have also somewhat changed their mask recommendation. That's very, very similar to what we had put out in December. So the take home is, as we talked about last month, the best mask is that a multi-layer mask that is comfortable and fits well is the best mask. But if you can tolerate a higher grade mask like an N95 or a KN95 and it fits well, then that may afford more protection. So in the spirit of having people the resources to actually act on those public health recommendations, we do have a large supply of N95 in our warehouse. And we have been working to get requests from our K-12 schools. These are for adults, so your staff and teachers. They are not pediatric size, they're adult size. We got many, many, many requests from individual schools and districts, which is terrific. That people really took us up on the offer. What we are then, because we got so many requests, then we've been working with DPI and thinking through a more standardized way to get those orders up through the LEAs, be able to deliver them through the LEAs, and then disseminate back out to the schools. In order to make that more streamlined process, we did create a new survey link that went out earlier this week. To the districts in order to understand how much they want, where would be the point of contact for shipment, where would be the location for shipment, so they can then coordinate with the actual schools in their district. So that survey response is due tomorrow. We're very excited about it. We have the masks all ready to go, and we will be pushing them out as quickly as possible to get them to your districts. And that is it in my brief update. So thank you for the opportunity, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Dr. Tilson.
Mr. Chairman.
Colleagues, Mr. Treasurer.
Thank you. Just a brief question. I brought this up at the Council of State this week. Just a verification, and it's important for all in the audience to know that the executive branch has a cabinet, and there's a Council of State, and then we have our own agencies, so to speak. And it's common knowledge there's a scarcity of tests. And there's a common knowledge that many of our state employees have the opportunity to work remote. You can't serve a lunch to a school kid remotely. You can't pave a road remotely. So my question is, I am not in a conversation here about masks and vaccinations. I'm in a conversation about process. To your knowledge, do you know if we are requiring people who will not submit a vaccination validation, who are working remotely, to get tested? Because if we have a limited supply of tests and not everyone can work remotely, I just don't know the value and the virtue of requiring people who, for one reason or another, are not vaccinated to be required to get testing when they're working remotely.
Thank you for that question. And as you did point out in the beginning, under the executive order, it applies to cabinet agencies, not to non-cabinet agencies. And currently, the policy is people, regardless if they're working remotely or not, to either require documentation of vaccines or a negative test. That is the current policy for cabinet agencies.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Sure.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for that answer. That's an accurate answer. I just want to know if you think that if we have a scarcity of tests, that requiring people who are working remotely to get tested is, when you have a scarcity of something, is the best way to get out of that scarcity.
Yeah, and I do appreciate that question, and I will hesitate from commenting on policy in this meeting. But what I will say, though, is that, again, the data that I presented in the beginning slide, we have an enormous viral transmission, that any way to increase that regularity of testing will be an important strategy across the state as a whole.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Chair. And I just would say anecdotally that, going back sort of what I talked about earlier about proficiency versus graduation, the average citizen is getting bombarded with mixed messaging, and we all appreciate the president's move toward making testing available. But we also know that from people that we are documenting of how long it's taken to get these tests, why there's such a bottleneck. And I'm only speaking on behalf of the 750,000 people who are on the state health plan who are also looking for tests. And so as I said earlier, I'm not talking about I wear a mask and I've been vaccinated. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about how we can operationalize ourselves out of this testing scarcity. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for answering my question.
Thank you, Treasurer. Any other comments or questions about the presentation as it concerns our public education system? Vice Chair Duncan.
I think this is a good time to ask this question because there's no changes in the toolkit pending right now. And I want to preface it with thanks for what a fabulous partner DHHS has been to continually to update us in a detailed way on a monthly basis for almost 2 years now. One of the things that has arisen, and I asked this question on behalf of superintendents and workers in the districts, is that at one point the toolkits came out with a little bit of notice to them on the front end to be prepared for whatever it might be that would occur. More recently, there's been a couple of new issuances of toolkits that they have not been aware of until they got calls from the press about what they're going to do in response to a document they haven't seen or digested. Absent there being some form of a really emergent situation, and I realize that's possible in this context, is it possible that we can work to try to give the districts 24 hours notice of what upcoming changes might be so they can digest the information and be in a position to react well for their students and for their parents and their employees? And I think that's just a request that's circulating that would be very valuable to the various LEAs around the state. So I ask it on their behalf.
Thank you for that question. That is a terrific question, and typically that has been our norm. Typically, if we make a change, we do have a standing meeting every Tuesday with all our LEAs and local health departments. We typically highlight and preview those changes on Tuesday, and then we follow up with the state board meeting on a Thursday. So we typically do that and try to give people awareness. In January, as we were coming off the holiday, that LEA, LHD call ended up having to be moved to the following Tuesday. So the state board meeting happened before the LEA meeting. And so we were off cycle in January. That is true. But typically our cycle is we roll anything out on Tuesdays with our LEAs and then to the state board on Thursdays, because we completely understand the problem of having changes without being aware of. So you are absolutely right. The timing was just difficult that we were coming off the holiday break, but absolutely hear you loud and clear, and that is our intention, and we try to do that as our normal course of business.
Thank you.
Any other comments?
Mr. Chairman, can I ask a quick question to Dr. Tilson?
Mr. Hall.
Thank you, sir. This has to do with on the discussion about the full booster shot as a result of the information coming out of the recent study in Israel. My question is whether or not there's any discussion at your level or the CDC about that particular fourth booster shot. Just quickly.
Yeah, so you're asking about an additional booster?
Yes.
Yeah, so I think what we are learning, and again, what I was showing you was the most recent data that we have on the effectiveness of that third dose, that third booster. So that data that we have from early January is still showing very, very high rates of protection with that third dose. What the CDC will do, much like what they did when they were looking at the protection of the first two doses to understand, is there waning of immunity, if and when might we need a booster, what they will then continue to do is continue to track the effectiveness of this third of the booster, understand how it's interplaying with whatever virus is circulating, understanding if there'll be a waning of immunity, and if so, then we'll make a recommendation on if and when there will need to be a timing of a fourth dose. So yes, I am aware of the Israel study, but again, what I just showed with you was right now it looks like there's still very, very, very strong protection with that third one, but that will absolutely, that data will be followed. And if and when there is a time that it looks like another dose is indicated, then that recommendation will be made. But right now, you should feel assured that if you are fully vaccinated and a booster, you have high levels of protection now.
Thank you, Doctor. That's well comforting for me.
Good.
Superintendent.
Thank you, Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dr. Tilson, I so appreciate this report and also that you highlighted for us the number of, well, the fact that there is no statewide masking order for schools. There is no statewide masking order at all, but there is guidance in our toolkit that does recommend masking for students. And I believe your data pointed out that 26 out of 115 LEAs are mask optional. So it's very clear that our LEAs, the vast majority of our LEAs take this guidance very seriously. And so to that end, I'm hoping that you can share with us how many children have been hospitalized in the last 6 months due to COVID.
Sure, I'm happy to do that. And I would also call to people's attention that we have a lot of data on our publicly available dashboard, including data on obviously our cases, on our hospitalizations, on our death, and they are broken down by age. So this is all publicly available data. What I can share in terms of hospitalizations and what we look at is the breakdown of ages of new people, new admissions to the hospital. So that's how we look at our age breakdown. When I went back and I looked at in the past week, so the past week ending 1/28, there were 140 children age 0 to 17 who were hospitalized in the past week. When I went back and looked in the past 6 months, so from July 29th through January 28th, that was almost 1,300 children who had been hospitalized in the past 6 months, 1,279. And then going back since August of 2020, there's been more than 2,000, about 2,215 children age 0 to 17 that have been hospitalized. Just of today or yesterday, some of our hospital reporting is going to get even more granular and will break down between preschool 0 to 4 and more granular breakdown within those children age groups so we can get more precise data as we move forward. Specifically, as I think Superintendent Truitt, you were asking specifically about school-age children, and we'll be able to get some more of that granular data going forward.
So just to be clear, do we know of the let's say either the 1,300 in the last 6 months or the 140 in the past week? Do we know if those are children who are in the hospital because of COVID or children who went to the hospital for some other reason and tested positive for COVID?
Sure, and we get this question all the time. What the data shows is hospitals report to us people who are in the hospital with COVID. And we've looked at different data of whether or not it's the primary diagnosis and or it could well be a secondary diagnosis that is exacerbating some underlying chronic illness. There's a lot of gray zone. It's difficult to disentangle exactly if it's just primary or exacerbating what might be an underlying health condition. But regardless of that, what we're also finding is that once they're in the hospital with COVID, there needs to be extra infection control measures, extra hospital resources, extra PPE that needs to be put in place. So it is still a large strain on our healthcare system, regardless if it's with or for. And it is hard to disentangle those two. The last data poll we had was the majority, it was the primary diagnosis, but again, it is also people who may well have diabetes, asthma, and that is exacerbating their underlying chronic condition at a point that they need hospital level care. So it is very hard to really precisely disentangle that, but there's a lot of overlay and between the from and the with.
Okay, so I guess then, you stated earlier that you've given districts metrics to look at. Are those in line with the CDC low prevalence guidelines that define low prevalence, which in other words means lifting masking recommendations to fewer than 10 cases per 100,000?
No, ma'am. Well, our guidance to the districts are that as long as if you are in high and substantial, then we recommend universal masking. And the definition for substantial, which I highlighted in that first slide, would be a case rate of more than 50 per 100,000 and a percent positive of 8 or more. That's the threshold for substantial. Below that, there's moderate or low, those are lower, but what our recommendation is, as long as you're substantial or high, to consider universal mask, so not low, higher than that.
Okay, I'm going to close with this. So, as I said, it's very clear to me that the majority of our districts are taking guidance from the toolkit, and that you've laid out pretty clear metrics for them for when they can consider safely removing mask mandates for students. I would encourage DHHS to perhaps include in its presentations to the board moving forward the data around hospitalizations for children. That should be, I believe, a part of your slides. It's useful to have the adult data, but we need the children data as well. And finally, it's very concerning to me that an assistant superintendent in one of our larger districts has presented to the state board that a recommendation that we start masking 2 to 4-year-olds so that we can prepare them for masking in elementary school. That does not indicate progress towards removing the mask mandate. And so I would also like next month to learn a little bit more about the role that immunity has in spread. We know that 90% of the country before the Omicron virus, according to the CDC, 90% of Americans have antibodies against COVID, either from being infected or from vaccination. We're at a rate of, I believe, 69 or 67% of North Carolinians having received at least one dose, and 47% are boosted. So is it possible for us to know our immunity percentage drilled down to our state? Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Superintendent. And Dr. Tilson, thank you for your report this month, and we'll look forward to our continued partnership with the Department of Health and Human Services. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now take a break and return at 10:40. 10:40.
this is my new kitchen. No, it's not done yet. They didn't build the house. There's like 8 floors. Because every time we build the house, it's like the easiest way to sell a house. Yeah, but normally it's pretty quick, but because of all these stupid supply chain issues, it's he's pretty cool. He's pretty cool. But we, like, the builder, we put in a ridiculous amount of money for, yeah, okay, so this is my new kitchen. And then this is the cool thing, like, this whole thing here is the family room, and then there's like a whole wall of glass that goes out to the pool. Anytime you want.
I kid you not. Matter of fact, I'm gonna come and watch the dog because I don't know. That's gonna be a vacation for me.
And then you're gonna do
Girl, you better stop because you already know you are. You okay forever. You already know this. Don't play me.
We have 5 bedrooms.
Don't worry. And your children, let your children come. But you don't get
That's honestly one of the big reasons why we have a big house. So like between, well, my sister lives there, like her niece, my nieces and nephews.
So this is your family. This is your family.
So my sister's husband, let me tell Matt.
Okay, go ahead.
Very adverse background. I don't know what it is. No.
Recorded and posted for posterity for others.
No, it's a
So like I'll see some things like after. You're just beautiful.
Wear my color.
Oh, yeah, because he's very loud.
I had planned on shopping. That is my breaking point.
Yeah, you know, I know we have to.
All right, everybody, let's start piping down, please. You ready to go back live in a minute?
You'll pick another one once I finish yours. Let me show you. Okay, look. These are the ones I found. So I'm gonna go get this stuff to make today after the meeting. Stop. Thank you. And I saw the example. History, and I wanted to make it for you. But look, okay, so these are the ones that I found.
With 99 alerts.
Julie.
It's instead of saying history, it says I am.
I know, that's
They had a couple different ones, like, I don't know, do you want like those positions? I think you're. And do you like those colors? They're all okay. All right.
Like he will.
Okay, so anyway, back to restaurant. $6,000. It's like, you know, because like you get like.
All right, everybody, let's pipe down. Let's take our places, please, so we can get started.
Okay, we are back in session and we'll move to our committee reports. I remind committee chairs and the audience that all voting on consent and any item requiring action will be done at the end of the agenda via roll call. We'll begin our committee's reports with actually the committee work by our Government Affairs Committee led by Mr. Wendell Hall. Mr. Hall.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and once again, good morning to all. I am Wendell Hall. I do chair the Committee on Government and Community Affairs, along with Vice Chair Jill Cammix. This morning, we were here with an overview of the report from the committee under the direction of Mr. Freeburg McKinney, along with Ms. Pittman and others from DPI on visits and things they have found over the last month concerning dealing with recruitment and retention that's going on out in the communities and our districts, whole child services, the wraparound services that's needed under social emotional learning. Hopefully we'll hear some more about teacher cadets, school-based staff development for our administrators, and a new program that's out in Appalachian State University. It's called MR, that deals with a mentoring effort that the university is involved in and partnerships across the state. with school systems and partnerships between school districts. We also will hear something about our blue ribbon schools once again that have been visited. I know we won't hear all of this, but this is just the makeup of the committee for this month. And I will turn it over now to Mr. Freeburg McKinney.
Good morning, Chair Davis, Superintendent Truitt, Vice Chair Duncan, Lieutenant Governor Robinson, Treasurer Falwell, board members and advisors, our colleagues here at the board and the department, and to all our friends and colleagues across this great state of the Shire. My colleague Julie Pittman and I bring greetings on the beginning of Black History Month as we wrap up an eventful month. The events in January took the community affairs team, particularly Mr. Wallace and I, to the land of Graceland in Memphis, Tennessee, to work with our Elevate NC cohort and our new Tennessee education partners, as well as to the doorstep of room 306 of the Lorraine Motel with the sounds of the mountaintop speech ringing through the hallways of the National Civil Rights Museum. We listened to Texas's affordable teacher residency model and what we may learn from their successes. We listened and learned from teachers and students presented at GTAC. We worked with districts and EPPs in collaboration on the most fundamental and vital workforce need our state has moving forward: educator recruitment and retention. Julie and I are honored to share the committee's work and our partners' commitment and dedication to this cause today. So as you see here, again, just highlighting the strategic alignment to the State Board strategic plan. Next slide, please. Also to alignment to Operation Polaris and implementation. We like to put these every month as we present, just to make those very important tie-ins. And then also to, again, reiterate the committee's priorities, as Chair Hall mentioned, both strengthening statewide support for student health and well-being, as well as coordinating and consolidating partnerships across this state in regards to teacher recruitment and retention.
So earlier this month, we went to the Wright College of Education at Appalachian State University. You can go to the next slide, please. We had an eventful 2 days there where we heard from a variety of different focus groups and partners, as well as were able to lead a couple of panels from their advisory board. I want to talk to you a little bit about the focus groups as they pertain specifically to this committee. Our first focus group was with core content professors, people from their School of Ed admissions, deans, and community college partners. They have, at App State, built an ecosystem of recruitment and retention strategies that have built up their pipeline for future teachers, created innovations in preparing them, and continual support of alumni once they are out in the field. They see their work at App State as not terminal, but cyclical, constantly preparing, learning, supporting, and recruiting through the school and their alumni ambassadors. The college is always looking to stay ahead of trends and obstacles. They're focused on underserved and unrepresented populations. CTE and workforce development focuses fully online residency programs, cohorts on site and at Caldwell Community College and Catawba Community College, other online certifications and programs to help meet the needs of the educational workforce in partnerships with districts and across North Carolina. They have partnerships with community colleges for 2+2 pathways that create smooth transitions because of the relationships and true cohesive vision for partnering in preparation between the Wright College of Education and their community college partners. In Focus Group 2, we can stay on the same slide there. In Focus Group 2, we met with students, specifically their literacy scholars. They are part of a 5-university cohort that was granted to help with the EPP better preparing our future teachers in literacy skills and pedagogy.
These student teachers are going through letters training alongside their cooperating teachers and other university professionals. They're building content and working with their cooperating teachers. They're practicing in classrooms and in partnership with their professors. They're going to be able to, along with the other 4 universities, literacy scholars, be able to really transform how our universities are preparing our future teachers and really alleviating the pressure that is being put on the districts for training teachers so that it is a true partnership that's going to start with the EPPs. And then from these future teachers, we heard things like Appalachian State University has high expectations. I want to instill a love of learning in my students. I feel inspired to teach. I want my students to desire to learn about other people and other cultures. I'm excited about my future as an educator, but I'm also nervous about my ability to sustain myself, my mental health, and my financial stability. How do I prepare for the emotional burden of taking care of the children who are going to be placed in my care? And then focus group 3, we met with beginning teachers and their partners with new teacher support program and their coaches. We heard things like, we were fully prepared for so much that we needed before we entered the classroom. We were given the foundation at App State to be teacher leaders, even as beginning teachers. And we also heard, I have been surprised by how much teachers have to hold and adapt, how frazzled I can feel, and how much the mental load is. One teacher gave us some profound thoughts. He said, I wish people outside of education and people in Raleigh who are making decisions knew what the state of the profession might look like after May. Many teachers are weighing the opportunity cost of being a teacher. What opportunities are we missing in life because of the work and burdens of being a teacher? How much time and relationships are we giving up for our schools, our kids, professional development? What money? And while money is important, it's not the reason that some teachers are leaving the profession, because we knew what we were getting into. And people in decision-making roles might choose to leverage that. People are leaving the profession because so much is being put on us and not much is being taken off. The work at Appalachian State University does to support its alumni, not just its students, is so important, and that is a lifeline to those teachers in the field throughout their career. And we saw that at the advisory board that Freebird is going to talk to you about. We also very quickly we toured the Lucy Rock Early Childhood Laboratory, where we were able to see how they're training teachers in birth through early childhood before they go into kindergarten, and we also visited the Kaleidoscope after school program. So we were able to see a variety of different ways that the university is supporting not only its teachers, but its community and the future of the profession.
So the advisory board was a very unique opportunity to listen to multiple sectors of the education community. This visit was actually a carryover visit from later in 2021 when Superintendent Truitt, Julie, and I all 3 visited. This is another opportunity to engage that community. So the App Advisory Board was a collaboration between App State's Wright College of Education, their alumni, their faculty. It was led by Dr. Melba Spooner, their dean, the superintendent of Caldwell County Schools, Don Phipps, Bethel Elementary Principal Brian Bettis, Northwest Regional Teacher of the Year Tanya Smith from Elkin High, App State Professor Julie Schmidt-Hassan, and pre-service teacher Jack Dumfrey, among many others. We learned about collaborative partnerships like their partnership with New Teacher Support Program and their programs with community colleges. We also learned about how App State and North Carolina Public Schools are working together to enhance and build the teacher pipeline, like through the Literacy Leaders program that Julie mentioned. We learned about App State's support in developing educator efficacy and effectiveness, And we also listened to challenges facing our pre-service and our in-service educators. This is what it looks like to have a collection of educators that not only discuss policy, but also present viable solutions. This is one of the things that Julie and I really tried to focus on, is to listen to what the challenges are, but where also do the solutions lie, to really inspire that asset-based mindset. And we felt like this was a great model to kind of share out across the state, whether it's through our EPP partnerships or our community college partnerships, but also engaging more at the local level and the district level and bringing together a panel of everyone who's engaged in the education process. Next slide, please. And this is just a few pictures of the students that we led with the focus group, and then also the panel in and of itself. That is Jack there in the center, one of their students. The next day took us to Appalachian State's Academy at Middle Fork. And this is, as you well know, one of the lab schools that was shared about yesterday by Dr. Bill Broberry. Again, we feel like, again, within this committee's work, to really understand the work of the lab schools, this will be the third lab school we've gone to. We've presented earlier in our presentations on several others, including one that is hosted by UNCW as well. This one is located in Walkertown, North Carolina. And it is a partnership between App State University and Winston-Salem Forsyth County Schools. Some of the, I think the highlights of this, if you go to the next slide, please. We met with Director and Assistant Dean, Dr. Hannah Reeder, who actually was kind of our leader throughout the 2 days. She's been an incredible partner, ranging back from when Superintendent Truitt joined at App State to this most recent visit. We also listened to Principal Amy Snow and many of the programs and initiatives that they're beginning there in partnership with App State. And I think one of the most important individuals we met was a unique position, the Director of Student Affairs and Emergency Management. This was Darren Daniels, and so it's a student health and well-being position, but also gives him the opportunity to work one-on-one with students in social emotional skills and resiliency. And was this a real, I think, key to the success of this school in particular is how much that wraparound child support is present. And then we got to go into Allison Phelps' room, who is a STEM teacher, watch her kids interact with Brick Ed, which is a Lego-based STEM learning program, see some real hands-on activities. Julie and I even got down on the floor and helped them build their robotics at a little pathway with the Legos. So it was great to get back on the carpet with our students. And last, in this picture right here, you can see the student advisors. So they just talked about their experiences, talked about their passions, talked about their ambitions, and really allowed us to get into to the hearts and minds of the students that are being served at Middle Fork. So just overall an incredible experience. The next initiative we want to share about, we are very excited to, on February 23rd, to be visiting Elizabeth State University to learn more about their teacher cadet partnership, as well as looking and focusing on NC Promise programs and opportunities. As many of you know, NC Promise is a group of 4 universities in the state. So Elizabeth City State is one of them, University of Pembroke, Fayetteville State in Western Carolina, where students can go to the university for $500 a semester. So looking at this initiative, also looking at filling out the FAFSA, many of our students could literally go to these universities for free, including their books and licensure exams. So cannot wait to work more with them about building a pipeline that really supports, again, the building of educator pipeline development.
We're really excited about going to NCAT in Cullowhee in a couple of weeks. The superintendent and Freebird and I, in 3 weeks. What? Okay, well, I'll go quickly. Again, we'll truncate. We'll be going to the North Carolina Beginning Teacher of the Year Leadership Week. I think Eugenia is going to be there also for part of the time, where we'll be able to celebrate 27 teachers from across the state who are beginning teachers who've been recognized in their craft in their districts and lifted up to the state. And one of these educators will be named the North Carolina 2022 Prudential Beginning Teacher of the Year. We're really excited to also have last year's winner, Emily Higdon, who will also be there that week, who is serving on our Teacher Leadership Council at the state. And we're just excited to be able to work with those teachers and work with NCAT, which has really created a model for how we can lift up teachers, build teacher leadership, and support them in the field as a really incredible recruitment and retention model. Next slide, please. Earlier last month, we visited Asheville City Schools at our B. Jones Elementary School, and we were able to visit one of our regional teachers of the year, Susanna Serrato. There we were able to see integrated math and reading instruction that was engaging for students in every single classroom. But wow, there is no doubt why Susanna Serrato was selected as the Western Region Teacher of the Year. She is an artist in her craft of teaching, and every single child was engaged from the moment they walked in, and as were we. One of the things, if you go to the next slide, please, Susanna set up for us was a teacher, one of our very first teacher talks in the regions for this year, in the upper left-hand corner. We were able. We good? Awesome. In the upper left-hand corner, you can see that virtual panel that we were able to have. We had to do it virtually instead of face-to-face because of what we in the West called snowmageddon a few weeks ago when we had over 10 inches of snow. But Freeburg and I were able to meet with them, and we heard several things where we were able to gather feedback from what's going well, input on innovative solutions to challenges, and stories about how schools are supporting their students and educators. What we heard was restorative practices are at the center of what is happening in schools in Asheville City. But it needs to be scaled to all grades and across districts. That partnerships with community and businesses are critical and needs to grow. And that relationship building and communication have thrived and increased because of COVID. Our students are resilient there, but those teachers said that they need more people and more staff in all areas to help support them. Here is where a group like North Carolina Education Corps may be able to add assistance across the state. And luckily for Asheville City Schools, Susanna Serrato is on their board and is helping to make that happen there.
These are, again, just a brief overview of what we'll be focused on during the spring. We're really excited to be partnering with Dr. Angie Mullinex and the Promising Practice and in Pockets of Promise. Thank you, James. We'll be sharing at the next state board meeting on essential educator housing initiatives, particular as we return to Buncombe County on February 15th to work with them and to get their layout, and also learning yesterday on our PIO call about Caldwell County. So we're following up with Superintendent Phipps. We're also looking at districts models serving whole school and whole community, whole child. So we're taking several representatives from around the state back to Rockingham County to look at that model and to share out on that, including sharing out on new resources for social emotional learning that have been added to the website. So we're really thankful to the North Carolina SEL implementation team and Beth Rice, who you all heard yesterday, in our partnership there. Again, just kind of bulleted out where we'll be continuing to work. And then one other piece there is the teacher leadership partnerships. And the previous slide you saw Mr. Wallace and Mrs. Stover working with teachers in JoCo Teach. So we have been invited by several other districts to come and work with their teacher leadership programs. So we're excited to join Dr. Jackson down in Pamlico this month and work with their teacher leaders. The last slide is just something that Julie and I have really been working on with a multitude of our educators across the state, is this idea of educator diplomacy. Over and over we hear about, how can our voices be heard? How can we take part in the process of influencing, impacting, and discussing policy? So this is something that we've been sharing out with our colleagues across the state, really working on this. And we thought we'd kind of share some of the draft and the baseline to that thought process. We really feel like the value and the impact of the voices of educators, it could really be used as a tool, has always been hopefully considered, but particularly moving forward, because very few of us who are in the positions that we are now have actually taught or led during COVID. in our schools. And I think that's something that we really got to take into mind, is that our teachers and our principals are the first of many of us to actually do that. So listening to their voices and then learning how we can take that and use that appropriately, I think is going to be one of our priorities moving forward. So any questions? Julie and I would welcome those, and any comments as well. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Freeberg, and thank you, Julie. Let me say that also, this is a working committee, a hard working committee that's gone out and visited and gotten some ideas. I do hope that we will keep in mind the comments that were made by some of the beginning teachers on how difficult it is today, and help. Maybe we can do something in the future to help take some of that load off of them. We will be back in the near future, Mr. Chairman, with some recommendations coming from the committee. I thank them, and I thank you for listening to us. Do you have any other comments from anyone? Hearing none, thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to present to you and the board.
Thank you, Mr. Hall, and Ms. Pittman and Mr. McKinney, thanks to you both for keeping us connected to the real world and for continuing to be teachers by teaching us what you're hearing from our frontline teachers and principals. We can't get enough of that, and I just encourage us all to sort of bathe in the feedback that we just heard from Ms. Pittman and Mr. McKinney, and think deeply about how we support these heroic teachers that are educating our children in such challenging times. So thank you so much. That's important work that committee is doing. We'll now continue with our committee reports, and I'll begin with the Educator Standards and Practice Committee led by Dr. Olivia Oxendine. Dr. Oxendine.
Thank you, Chair Davis. I am Olivia Oxendine, and I chair the ES&P. Joining me in that leadership responsibility is Ms. Amy White. The first item that I will briefly truncate is an action item that we will take up momentarily, probably in about 30 minutes, and this is pertaining to the advanced teaching roles. Money, about $2 million, was made available during 2021. It comes under Session Law 2021-180. Additional funding has been allocated to the advanced teaching role, which must be considered, this money must be considered prior to approving the ATR award recipients. A plan for this additional funding was discussed in January last month, discussed again yesterday, and we are ready to act on that today. The money was distributed quite well by Dr. Tomberlin and his group, and I'll just very briefly go through. Option 1 is the option that we will be voting on today. 2021 proposed grantees planning funds, a portion of the dollars went in that category. The 2020 grantee funding reconciliation, a portion went there. Prior cohort renewal application, a portion went in that pot, and also initial contract for evaluation. So it was about $1.9 million that was distributed, and that is showing up in option 1 that we will be voting on very soon, very quickly. Then we had several discussion items. The first is ES&P 2, and this is a policy amendment to LICN 006 pertaining to experience degree credit for salary purposes, experience credit for the Masters of School Administration interns, and graduate level salary. So Dr. Tomberlin presented this item as well. He gave us several scenarios for the way this additional money would be, or the salary, the experience would be awarded. The first scenario is a 10-month intern, that would be a full-time intern, with receiving the state stipend. That individual would be eligible for the 1-year credit. The 10-month intern, grant paid stipend, or perhaps the LEA found some other sources to pay that stipend. Yes, that intern would be eligible for that year of credit. The 4-month, the 4-month on stipend, The intern accepts an administrative position, such as an AP, works in that position for 6 months. That individual is also eligible for the 1-year credit. On the 5-month stipend, accepts, let's say, an AP position, is in that position for 5 months, that is getting us up to the 10 months, that individual would not be eligible for that year of credit. So that item is going to come to us next month for consideration and voting. Also within that that amendment, teachers and this relates to the graduate pay going back to 2013. We developed some policies around the graduate pay. Teachers and support services personnel are eligible for the graduate level pay as stated in policy section LINC 006 if they completed, this was a minor tweak that we had to do in the policy, if they completed at least one course toward a master's or a 6-year degree or a doctoral level before August 1 of 2013, and the word "or" was in there, we changed that to "and," qualified for the salary supplement pursuant to SBE policy LINC 006 as it was in effect on June 30, 2013. So those matters will be coming back next month for our consideration. ES&P 3, end of lateral entry for the pre-K teachers. This is also a discussion item, and we will act on it next month. NC pre-K kindergarten teachers in a non-public setting may work through the Division of Child Development, Early Education, DCDEE, to obtain and maintain their licenses. So the change in policy reads this way. The DCDEE, which is the Division of Child Development, Early Education, may request a lateral entry residency license from DPI for individuals who meet the requirements for a lateral entry residence license. The DCDEE shall also administer, this is an important part of the policy, shall also administer a beginning teacher support program and license renewal program through DPI. ES&P 4, the University of Phoenix application, based on GS 11C 269, Section 10, an EPP may either be nationally accredited or seek approval by the State Board of Education to become initially authorized for EPP for the state of North Carolina. So University of Phoenix is coming to the State Board of Education. They would like to have this initial approval. I met with them along with Dr. Seiberg and Dr. Evans. We had a telephone conversation, or actually it was a WebEx, a few days ago. My questions had to do with, I really wanted a little bit more clarity around the science of reading, and they provided a lot of information. It gave me a lot of confidence that they're on target with that. We're going to continue to follow up a bit more, maybe in another WebEx in a couple of days or sometime next week, to include the superintendent, because we do want to ask additional questions around their licensing exams, specifically with the foundations of reading. A little bit more information about EdTPA. If they do that, I don't know whether they would, but we'll find out. So excited about this application, and we will be hearing more about it in the future and perhaps coming next month for us to approve. And ES&P 5, the revised licensure requirements for school administration, Part 2. This is the result of 115C 284, outlines very specific requirements for licensing principals in North Carolina. And we found, several months ago, we found that we were really not in compliance with that legislation. So a lot of work began around how do we get in compliance. The problem is we have a waiver. It's not a problem. It's a solution. The waiver, which is SL 170, is a waiver that is actually protecting a lot of our already licensed teachers principals, administrators in North Carolina. So the waiver provides for individuals who are licensed as school administrators for any school year from 2010-11 to 2020-21 to meet those licensure requirements stated in 115C284 until August 31, 2022. So the clock is ticking on the waiver, in other words. So specific details for this legislation were presented in November. We heard additional details in January, and we also heard some additional information yesterday. 3 stakeholder groups provided recommendations to Dr. Tomberlin and his working group. The recommendations come from the Teacher Recruitment and Retention Group, the Principal Advisory Group, who is that is facilitated and probably led by Mr. Wallace, and in CACTE, which is the North Carolina Association of Colleges for Teacher Education. The next path is taking those recommendations from those 3 groups and forwarding those recommendations to PEPSI, who will consider all the recommendations and forward a final one to the board, this board, in March. This is not a requirement. This work is not leading toward policy development yet. It is headed toward the General Assembly for their consideration and perhaps writing another law. So we had on the agenda yesterday, we were going to have an update on the limited licensure, where we stand in the state with the request for the limited license. We will have that report at a later time, perhaps next month or in the very near future. So that concludes my report.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. I now recognize Ms. Jill Kamnitz, Chair of the Student Learning and Achievement Committee. Ms. Kamnitz.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Dr. Oxendine and I work together to lead the work of this committee. And we started our committee and also the board meeting with a very happy announcement. It was an item of new business, an update on the Governor's School, and Ms. Shaw Coltrane shared with us that the new site for the Western Governor's School for this coming summer is going to be at Winston-Salem State University. And we are hoping that that is the beginning of a wonderful partnership, but we're very excited about partnering with the school to host this great program. We had one action on first read, which was SLA 1, a State Board of Education policy amendment around English language learners' exit criteria. This involves English learner students with significant cognitive disabilities. They take an alternate access assessment in order to exit identification as an English learner. This assessment's been in use since 2012, 2013, but exit criteria had not previously been set because of problems with the technical limitations of the data that was available to us. We now have sufficient data from recent administrations to recommend that a score of P1 or higher over the next 2 years will suffice for a student to exit the program. There will then be a review at the end of 22-23 to look at that data and determine whether 1 year of data will be sufficient to exit in the future. So that is a good off-ramp that was needed with that program. 2 action items, SLA 2, North Carolina Standard Course of Study Internal Procedures Manual. The manual provides guidance on the process for developing or revising a section of the Standard Course of Study, includes the topics, categories, and supporting materials to be included, and the considerations that must be made as standards are reviewed, revised, and implemented. It standardizes the process across all subject areas and provides for a consistent and transparent record of that work. And this manual will be followed by an external procedures manual for public school units to use as they adapt their own curriculum and teaching to the revised standards. So that will come forward for approval today. SLA 3 is a K-12 revised extended content standards for social studies. Each time we revise a set of content standards, the Exceptional Children's Division is required to align the extended the extended content standards. This is the required alignment with the social studies standards that we approved a year ago. These standards apply only to our students with the most significant cognitive disabilities, or about 1% of our population of students with disabilities. The recommended standards were developed by educators from across the state and across all grade levels who understand the needs of this small group of students. The standards will go into effect for students entering 9th grade this fall. Several discussion items: SLA 4, Every Student Succeeds Act update. Testing waivers are not available from the U.S. Department of Education for this academic year, but there are still some COVID-related adjustments that we need to make, which provide for a change in our ESSA plan that will be good for this school year only. The addenda includes a 2-year timeline shift in our interim progress targets toward our long-term goals. And that is being proposed for measures of academic achievement, graduation rate, and progress in achieving English language proficiency. ACT scores, which are used as an indicator of school quality or student success, will be adjusted to reflect a change in the UNC Board of Governors minimum requirement for admission. Adjustments to the criteria for identifying schools as targeted support and improvement schools are proposed. We are also revising exit criteria for comprehensive support and improvement schools, as well as targeted support and improvement schools. And finally, adjustments around the 95% testing requirement are also included in this addendum. Long-term changes to the ESSA plan would require an amendment, and it's recommended that we begin discussions of such an amendment this spring. Our plan has been in place since 2017-18, and the long-term effects of COVID need to be considered, so this offers us an opportunity to refine and further strengthen our plan. SLA 5 is 2020-21 Career and Technical Education Credential Attainment Report. This report includes a variety of data and comparisons based on the credentials earned by NC students last year. The total number of credentials has been rising steadily over the past 10 years. However, there was a significant drop this year due to the effects of COVID and some changes to the Perkins Act. We also reviewed the top 10 highest earned credentials, the PSUs whose students are earning the most credentials, and then data broken out by the 8 SBE regions. SLA 6 is a State Board of Education policy amendment of the state graduation requirements. This proposed change in policy reflects the legislative requirement that students who enter grade 6 in the fall of 2022 or later are required to take at least one arts course during grades 6 through 12. It also includes a reminder for public school units to consider the Interstate Military Compact when planning graduation requirements for children of military families. SLA 7 is also a policy amendment on graduation certification and participation for students with disabilities. Last month, we approved the revision of the extended content standards to reflect the new social studies standards. This amendment will update the list of courses in social studies that are required for students who are enrolled in the occupational course of study, which leads to a graduation certificate. SLA 8 is a report to the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee on the impact of lost instructional time. The Office of Learning Recovery has been coordinating this analysis, which compares students' pre-pandemic expected performance with their actual performance during the 2020-21 school year, as well as historical comparisons to trends before 2020. The initial report, which is required by March 15th, will offer a broad view of the overall statewide impact of COVID based on actual student data. It will be followed by a final technical report in December of this year, and at that point, the Office of Learning and Recovery will be able to provide aggregated data files and EVOS web reports based on individual LEAs and schools. The Office of Learning and Recovery is working with us and many other stakeholder groups, including meetings with each TRESA, to seek input on how this data can be most useful from policy levels to classrooms. SLA 9 is a report to the JLEOC on our competency-based education comprehensive strategic plan. The 2021 Appropriations Act required that the state board and DPI develop a strategic plan for a competency-based education program that provides credit by demonstrated mastery for students in grades 7 through 12 for credit recovery or acceleration. This report, which is due by March 22nd, will reflect the ongoing work in the department to develop the plan, which is a key part of Operation Polaris. The report includes information on the method of deployment of the competency-based education program, credit by demonstrated mastery, the impact on teacher development and competency, estimated cost of the program, and information pertaining to the competency-based assessment tool that Testing and Accountability has been updating us on regularly. The development of a North Carolina portrait of a graduate is also an important part of this process, and we will be continuing to hear about that work. Finally, we have 4 consent items. SLA 2 is a report to the JLEOC on cursive writing and multiplication tables. It is required that we report on LEA compliance with requirements regarding both of these things. And finally, 3 high schools in Haywood County have opted to seek State Board of Education accreditation, and it is recommended that all 3 be approved. They are as follows: SLA 11, Tuscola High School; SLA 12, Pisgah High School; and SLA 13, Haywood Early College High School. And that completes my report.
Thank you, Ms. Kamnitz. I'll now turn to Ms. Amy White, Chair of the Education, Innovation, and Charter Schools Committee. Ms. White.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Good morning, everyone. Jill Kamnitz and I have the privilege of leading this committee. Today, our report is going to highlight an action on first read. EICS 1 is the approval for the fall of 2022, a brand new UNC System Lab School. Dr. Laura Bilbrow-Berry presented a proposal for the state's newest lab school between Elkin City Schools and Appalachian State University. This will be Appalachian State University's second partnership. As you may or may not know, Article 29A of Chapter 116 calls for the creation of 9 lab schools by 2022. So this new lab school will get us towards that goal. We are hoping that next month we will be able to bring forward to you out of this committee a lab school partnership between North Carolina A&T and then the last one at UNC. Both of those universities are in the process of searching for partners and excited to bring that forward in March. EICS 2 are the 2022 charter school enrollment and expansion requests. We have one school before us that is for enrollment only, and that is Cardinal Charter. And then we have Cardinal Charter, Kip Durham, and Telra that are requesting expansion requests. And so those 3 schools will be before us. Enrollment is enrollment only. Expansion means a grade increase. So Cardinal Charter is enrollment only. Kip Durham and Telra are doing enrollment and a grade expansion request. That item is for action this month.
Can I ask one question on that one? I neglected that.
Yeah, sure.
On Telra, when they come for the expansion, they're asking to go over the limit, and that's the specific request. Will they have to come back as they continue to expand, or essentially are we saying, as we grant this, you can go on with your expansion plans? That just occurred to me. I wasn't clear about that on reflection.
I don't want to misspeak. Let's see if we have anyone from I think I know the answer, but rather than put that out in the public, I'm going to ask maybe if Mr. Machado could, or someone, or Ms. Beccaro could answer that question before we take our vote.
Yes, thank you. My apologies for asking it late.
Okay, thank you very much. That will take us to our discussion items. We'll pick up with EICS 3. This is a request, this is discussion for this month. Unity Classical Academy is a request to expand its actual enrollment from 467 to 600. They have a building expansion underway and have completed that and are looking to fill those new seats with people, and so they are with students, so they are before us with a request to increase their enrollment. EICS 4 is our 2022 charter school renewal recommendations. There are 27 schools this year in the renewal queue. 9 of those schools have been recommended for a 10-year renewal. 4 of those schools have been recommended for a 7-year renewal. There are no schools that have been recommended for 5 years. There are 12 schools who have been recommended for a 3-year renewal. And then before us for discussion also are 2 schools with a non-renewal status. Board members were provided yesterday with a number of different documents and supplements. One was the statute, General Statute 115C-218.5 that announces that the State Board of Education may grant the initial charter for a period not to exceed 10 years, and the State Board of Education shall renew a charter upon the request of the chartering entity for subsequent periods of 10 years unless one of the following applies. We've had questions over the years about how schools qualify for those 10 years, so this is the statute that backs that up. Also included at the board table was a packet that outlines the requirements for renewal at each individual year level. And at the back of that packet was a compilation in an Excel spreadsheet that included every school and general information about that school so that board members have the time to review that information before we bring those schools for action next month. The next item on our agenda was EICS 5. This was a report to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on the virtual charter school enrollment. This is in relation to Session Law 2020-97 with the use of coronavirus relief funds, and that was approved in September of 2020. In that legislation, 2 virtual charter schools who participate in the virtual charter pilot program were given an opportunity to expand their enrollment in response to coronavirus relief and opportunities for choice in education, in educational instruction in a virtual environment. And so this report was produced. The academic data, because of COVID and reporting, is hard to capture. But again, the information on enrollment and how many students took advantage of that statewide, per county, per PSU, was provided in the report. EICS 6 was a restart application submission from Pitt County Schools. I'm excited when Ms. Julie Garber brought that forward. That school in Pitt County is excited about beginning that partnership in an effort to increase the academic achievement of the school in Pitt County that's low performing. EICS 7 was a brand new proposal for the 3 new cooperative innovative high schools. Those 3 new cooperative innovative high schools are Cabarrus Early College of Health Sciences in Cabarrus County, Edge Academy of Health Sciences in partnership with Edgecombe Community College, and Wake Early College of Information and Biotechnology in cooperation with Wet Tech Community College. This was really exciting to see. During that presentation, we had the opportunity to see where across our state our cooperative innovatives are located, and it's perfect combination to the presentation that we heard from Superintendent Truitt this morning about our efforts statewide to prepare our students to be a part of the North Carolina workforce. The EICS 8 was a report to the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on our Career and College Promise. North Carolina Session Law 2011-145 states that the purpose of the Career and College Promise program is to offer structured opportunities for qualified high school students to dually enroll in community college courses that provide pathways consistent with subsection B of this section that lead to a certificate, a diploma, or a degree, as well as provide entry-level job skills. Things that need to be measured as a result of the Career and College Promise are things like high school retention rates, high school completion rates, high school dropout rates, certificate and associate degree completion, admission to 4-year institutions, and postgraduate employment.
Ms. Sneha Shah Coltrane, who also led the discussion on cooperative innovative high schools, brought to us this report that will then be forwarded to the JDL EOC and provided quite a bit of data. Unfortunately, academic data is missing, but she did share that in 2021, 32% of all graduates enrolled in at least one dual enrollment course during their high school career. And that percentage represents 34,254 students, an increase of 618 students from the previous 2019-2020 graduating class. And the graduates enrolled in an average of 7 college courses over the course of their high school year, with a total of 239,215 college courses. It was a great presentation, and certainly one of the tenets of our efforts to increase opportunities for our graduates to be well prepared to enter the workforce. We had one final item that is before us today for consent, and that was an amendment to the mission statement at Lake Lure Classical Academy. Mr. Chair, that concludes our report.
Okay, I think we have Mr. Machado here to address the question that came up.
Okay, Mr. Machado, Vice Chair Duncan had a question about Telra Institute.
The recommendation from Charter School Advisory Board is to grant the request for Telra to increase to 5th grade and 6th grade only. They did become before CSAB asking to expand all the way to 8th grade. They felt that was too aggressive of an expansion, so this recommendation from CSAB is for only grades 5 and 6 in the enrollment. If they want to add a 7th grade the following year, they'll have to come back and ask for your approval.
Thank you. That clarifies it. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Machado. Any further questions?
I do have a quick question, if I may.
Dr. Oxman.
Going back to your presentation on the lab schools, I heard you say something about by such and such 2022, like right now, 9 should have been up and going. What happens past, does the funding go away or something? What happens?
So there were, I'm sure there were someone, again, I think I'll answer correctly, but there were 9 in the original provision. And so this will, if the 2 more that come, that will get us to 9.
Mm-hmm.
And so.
So that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any further questions? Okay. Chair Davis.
Thank you, Ms. White. I now recognize Mr. Reginald Keenan, Chair of the Healthy Responsible Students Committee. Mr. Keenan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm Reginald Keenan, along with Allie Duncan. We are co-chairing on the HRS committee. Mr. Chair, yesterday we had an action item, and of course, Ms. Angel Bass did a great job, presenting some very, very important data. She talked about leverage the NC MTSS recommendations. As we talked about those particular recommendations, they are in line with Operation Polaris, also in line with our strategic plan, also aligned with the whole child model. And the recommendations, if I may, very quickly, so that the public will know what they were. The first one was use MTSS as the school improvement framework to organize existing and new social and emotional learning and school mental health efforts. Also, continue to communicate State Board of Education commitment to social and emotional learning as a level for academic success and educational equity. Support specialized instructional support, personnel, team instructors, and staffing at the state level, including state level school council, school nurse, school psychologist, school social worker, school mental health consultant, and school safety coordinator. And lastly, accessible funding for the North Carolina Social and Emotional Learning Information Team. And then we later had a discussion item. It was a consolidated data report. And again, Dr. Robert Taylor and Ms. Karen Furley did a great job going through the report. It's very in-depth. So every year we have to present this particular report to the General Assembly before March the 15th. And just some of the topics that it's included in the data report, you talk about crime and violence, suspension and expulsion, reassignments for disciplinary purposes, alternative learning, use of corporal punishment, and dropouts. There was some data there that showed improvement, but there's some data there also said that there's a lot of work to be done. As we know, a child cannot learn unless the child is in school. So I think this data will help us continue to focus on those who cannot stay in school, or why are they out of school? And Mr. Chair, with that comment, that concludes HRS report.
Thank you, Mr. Keenan. And now for the final committee report of the day, the Business Operations Committee. I'll turn to Vice Chair Alan Duncan.
Thank you, Chair Davis. My name is Alan Duncan. I report on behalf of the Business Operations Committee. BizOp 1 was approval of contracts over $500,000. We had 5 such contracts. Michael Ramsey reported on the cybersecurity contract that comes from the funding provided by the ESSER 3 funds. The Power School contract was reported on by Dr. Rob Dietrich. This is a contract that is intended to take us through a period where we have a request for proposals and follow up with potential replacement of a system that has served us well for a very long time, but is starting to tire. Our third contract was North Carolina Education Corps. This was a $13.5 million legislative piece from the General Assembly with respect to the ESSER 3 funds, and we heard from Dr. Marr. No, we did not. We heard from Ms. Barber, Dr. Barber, and we learned there that they have worked with NC Ed Corps, and there is a process of, once this contract is signed, there will be distributions made on a quarterly basis, perhaps turning to a monthly basis at some point. Our fourth contract is the school business financing. I think we're all used to hearing this one on an annual basis. This is an agreement that was made after competitive bidding this year with with Bank of America. I almost went back to my NCNB days, which dates me badly, with Bank of America. And so that contract will then provide the credit availability for providing the buses that are needed in the coming year. And that was presented by Kevin Harrison. Finally, Alexis Schaus presented NC ASBO contract, which was something that was passed and approved by the legislature. This will provide support, training, and assistance to all of our districts with respect to the work that's done in the chief financial officers with offices throughout the state. This is a very well-established, well-regarded group, and their talents will be extremely important as we have a lot of people who are new to the posts around the state, and this kind of training and support will be, I think, very important for all of us. Certainly that's an office we want for every PSU to have a very strong financial office. BizOp 2, our second item, has 2 parts of it. First was policy amendment allotments for the American Rescue Plan, which was presented by John Kiefer, and the second part was state capital and infrastructure funds grants that was presented by Nathan Mon. Dealing in first with the ESSER 3 grants, we had 5 areas where PRCs were set up. The North Carolina Preschool Pyramid expansion will be at PRC 190. It's allotment of funds to LEAs to expand the North Carolina Preschool Pyramid model across and within local school administrations. The STEM pilot program established by the legislature is PRC 196 and is to allot funds to LEAs or PSUs for the use of Plasma Games educational software to bridge the gap between chemistry and physical science curricula. It's a CTE pathways that comes for use for our students. Third area is Educational Competitive After-School Robotics Grant Program, PRC 201. Again, an allotment made by the legislature. These funds are being allotted to PSUs to operate on evidence-based after-school programming for robotics education and competition. Many of you have seen some of the robotics competitions around the state, and they're really quite exciting, and they're also display very well the talent of so many of our students. Some of these robotics are extraordinarily advanced, so it's a great program, and these competitions are well, let's just say they're very competitive. Mm-hmm. They really are. So our next is School Psychologist Grant Program, which is PRC 204, which is to allow an allotment of funds to public school units to offer signing bonuses for school psychologists. And this is something that has been supported by the board, and this sets out the allotment policy for these funds. The last item is the National Board for Professional Teaching Standards Certification Fee Reimbursement Program. This is again something, PRC 198, was again approved by the legislature and sets out the process for how these funds will be reimbursed to teachers who are receiving this type of important professional certification. So that completes the ESSER 3 funds that were proposed for policy. With respect to the state capital funding, we have a presentation by Nathan Mon about the allocations that will be made and how the allocations will be made for about $12.3 million of state funding in various different areas focused on facilities and PSUs around the state. Ms. White asked a question, and I have some information on that for those interested. And the residential school, the question was, to repeat the question first, was whether or not our residential schools could participate in receiving some of these capital funds as well, since we all know our residential schools also have capital needs. And the answer to this point is the residential schools are K-12 schools, but because they're state-owned facilities that are part of a state agency, DPI, us, the capital facility needs at these campuses are funded from annual appropriations to the State Repair and Renovation Reserve, which is administered by OSBM. All state agencies submit facility R&R funding requests annually to OSBM, and we have done that and advocated for capital needs for our residential schools. DPI submits a combined agency-wide list of facility repair needs to OSBM during the annual cycle, and our list did include multiple fundings for the residential schools and also requests for the NCAT campuses and other DPI facilities as appropriate. Several people have noted this facility itself could also benefit from some capital work in addition to the many other facilities. Of course, our students come first, so the residential facilities is the first focus that people have. DPI is required to distribute, is the understanding of staff after looking at this, these K-12 athletic facility grant funds to subrecipients that are, quote, non-state entities, end quote, and that we are not permitted to retain a portion of these grant funds within the agency. In order to make certain of this, however, staff is reaching out to OSBM, which oversees all of this, with the question to see if there's any way that there could be some use put to the residential schools, and we'll share any additional information that we receive back from OSBM should there be a way or a pathway, if you will, to find an ability to use any of those funds for the residential schools. I hope that answer, which is still not fully complete, though better describes where we are and the reasons why the splits were made.
May I follow with a comment?
Please.
So I so appreciated that team coming over and just having the discussion, and just to exacerbate the point, the funds that we discussed yesterday were extra and specifically designated for athletic facilities. And so that's in one pot. When the residential schools make a request for a facility improvement, it's not a ask all, get all, and so they have to prioritize. And so there are many, many needs on those campuses, and if I were a campus administrator, my prioritization would probably go more towards needs for structures for instructional delivery, and athletics most likely would be at the bottom of the list. And so because the new pot of money was specifically designated for athletics, I felt like there was a shortfall in an opportunity to have the residential schools have a pot of money that could go specifically for their athletic facilities. So to me, it was an equity issue. Otherwise, they're stuck in providing one lump sum request with X amount of dollars for utilization, and athletics might not be at the top of their list. But background, my mother taught physical education at the Governor Moorhead School of the Blind, and every student deserves to have an opportunity for quality facilities wherever possible.
Yes, and I think we're all appreciative of you lifting this up as part of this conversation. So thank you for doing that, and thank you for those additional comments. So finally, on Biz Op 2, on the recommendation, it's recommended that the State Board of Education approve the SBE policy amendments for the ESSER 3 allotments, and further that we approve the state capital and infrastructure funds grants, which were reviewed with us, so that those can be distributed, and we will, again, complete the loop with OSBM in the meantime as we move forward. Biz Op 3 was a presentation by Dr. Townsend on the 21st Century Community Learning Centers cohort. This is cohort 16, and I will say that we have become pretty familiar with the procedure, having gone through a number of these, so I will not try to repeat that. I will say I think we're all appreciative of Dr. Townsend and her team continue to try to find ways to make these grants serve all students in all parts of the state, and came forward with a couple of additional further innovations to make sure that there was fairness in the providing of these grants, and we all are appreciative of that fact. Biz Op 4 was the NC State School Improvement Project allotments. And of course, it's recommended that we approve these allotments. This is for professional development opportunities to better serve our students with disabilities. And these are truly not just for special education educators, but for all educators to have programming for professional development available to them so that they can better serve these students and better understand how to best serve these students. So these are important grants. They, again, are distributed. The process was described to us. We are approving also where the grants are going, and the intent is to have these widely distributed around the state. Biz Op 5 those were all action items, I should say. Biz Op on first read. Biz Op 5 is an action item, but it's not on first read. I think it's the third time we've seen it, and had some excellent discussion previously in order to clarify how we best deal with the policy amendment modifications for the NC North Carolina Benefits Policy Manual. As you recall, the last item came down to vacation and how that's dealt with in terms of what needs to be provided by the educator on that. And we have now come, after a lot of discussion with the board, we have come to that amendment for the policy that Dr. Tomberlin presented to us, and that will be before us for vote today. We had a discussion item, Biz Op 6, where Nancy Cross from CTE came to us to report on the Joint Legislative Education Oversight Committee's credential bonus report, which is an annual requirement that we provide to the legislature by March 15th of every year. And this was a discussion item, and we had a couple of points in our meeting yesterday, in committee meetings, had good discussions about CLE and credentialing issues. Yes, and so this will be the report that's provided. Will be approved next month. If there's any questions between now and then, we certainly want to respond to those and deal with those. We have one consent item which has to do with certification of chief financial officers in several PSUs. We had an update on contracts, so we're executed contracts report and the planned contracts report were available to all to review. On our monthly budget report, Alexis Schaus led a report on North Carolina virtual public schools, which was very timely as we looked at as we continue to look and will continue to look at different parts of our budget. Dr. Mia Murphy and Dr. Elizabeth Colbert gave us a presentation about the work that's being done and the breadth of courses and the certifications for these courses that have been obtained. So we saw both the economic side, and then we saw the side of how many students are being reached and the good work that's being done in that regard. Very helpful report. Then we had an implementation report on our various CARES Act and ESSER funds from Dr. Townsend. She focused on 4 specific areas that are overseen by federal funding in terms of what has been done, how much of the funding has been distributed, how much is left. Not unlike other reports we've seen, the original CARES funding and the ESSER 1 funds are the ones that are basically completed. There is a good deal of spending that is planned for in ESSER 2 and ESSER 3 funds, which extend through September 30th of 2023 and September 30th of 2024, respectively. Finally, we had the agency vacancy report, and Ron Paxton gave a brief report to us, updating us on redirection of positions. and the work that's being done to get people in those positions. And with that, I believe we're complete unless there are any questions, Chair Davis.
Thank you, Vice Chair Duncan. Any questions on that extensive report? Dr. Oxendine.
I don't have a question on Vice Chair Duncan's report, but Chair Davis, I do need to go back to ES&P too and do a little bit of detailing on that a bit, if you don't mind.
Okay.
It's a discussion on, it is discussion, so, but I know it's gonna come back, but I do need to get this on the record. The question that I hope Dr. Tomberlin maybe he's hearing it, if not, we can get to him. It has to do with the experience degree credit for salary purposes, and this for the full-time intern in the MSA program, and we have those scenarios, those 4 scenarios. But the other question that I think begs for some clarification is, would this year of credit also apply to the full-time intern who is not seeking the MSA degree? Because we do have many interns full-time on a leave of absence, but they are just seeking the principal endorsement, not the full degree. So we probably need some clarification around that. And I do need to clarify a couple things about the scenarios. The 4-month, the intern, MSA intern, 4 months on stipend, accepts an AP position for 6 months. That, and the same applies to the 5-month and the 5-month of an AP. That doesn't mean that those candidates aren't completing their programs of study. Just because they accept an AP position, for instance, in the middle of the internship, they still have to complete their degree requirements. So that needs to be clarified. It isn't that they just stop in the middle of their program and become an assistant principal.
Thank you, Dr. Oxendine. We'll add those comments to the record of your committee's report.
Thank you so much.
You bet. So, colleagues, that concludes our committee reports. We do have 2 items under the chairman's report. The first deals with proposed rules for interscholastic middle and high school athletics. And I'll turn to our general counsel, Ms. Allison Schaefer, for this item.
Good afternoon. I think we're right there at afternoon. I'm here to just tell you about our proposed action on first read for the proposed High School Athletic Association rule to create a temporary rule. As most of you know, there was legislation passed in November of 2021 to basically change the structure of the requirements for the state board's program of high school athletics. This program has always been the responsibility of the state board, and we do have current athletic rules on that topic, but the General Assembly changed the structure of how we needed to run that program. So this rule is to implement what has been passed by the General Assembly. The rule has been the topic of discussion between the state board representatives and the High School Athletic Association representatives, as well as legislators who had input in the passage of the law. So we have come up with what we believe satisfies all parties' concerns about how this relationship will be going forward between the state board and athletic associations. So what the rule does is it now covers all PSUs, public school units, not just the LEAs, the school districts. It's been expanded to cover charter schools and other schools such as the lab schools and the agency schools, the residential schools. The eligibility rules, it remain essentially the same, so we've taken out from the current rule, we've repeated what currently is in rules in terms of eligibility, and there are some penalty rules that have always been in place that are also still in place. The big change is to require a memorandum of understanding between the State Board of Education and the high school, and any administering organization, which could be the High School Athletic Association or other administering organizations. There may be I believe there's an organization that does have some charter school members in it. We would need to work with them too. So we are in the process of working on those MOUs. They're not before you today, but that is required in order for an organization to administer a program of interscholastic sports. The rule before you allows the state board to delegate certain tasks to administering organizations, including waiving eligibility requirements. When there's a hardship, that's already the practice in the current rule, but also it allows them to adopt, enforce, the administering organization to adopt, enforce, apply and enforce penalty rules, administrative rules, and gameplay rules, subject to veto power by the State Board of Education, and that's in the legislation. The rule tracks the legislation pretty closely. An administering organization must also submit to annual audits, must broadcast their meetings to the public, and must produce records to the State Board. And there's also a provision in the proposed rule for an independent appeals organization for aggrieved PSUs who disagree with a decision of the Athletic Association to appeal to an independent board appointed by the State Board. Those are the main components of the rule consistent with the legislation. And again, we will be working with the administering organizations that wish to provide these services to enter into the MOUs before March 15, which is the deadline for us to be to have entered into those. It has been the result of joint efforts from lots of organizations to try to come to a place where everyone can feel comfortable. This rule will be, the reason we're asking for it to be passed on first read now is so that we can have it done in place for the next school year to be ready. There is a requirement that we have a 30-day comment period, and we will, if the board passes this rule, we will begin that process of having a comment period. It will be a temporary rule, and then eventually it will become a permanent rule. It's a process we need to follow in order for it to be effective. Any questions that I can answer for anyone?
So, Ms. Schaefer, just a little bit more about that closing statement around the process. It becomes a temporary rule, and then we must submit to the Rules Review Commission?
The temporary rule has to be submitted to the Rules Review Commission, but it's a shorter process than going through the full rulemaking, which takes about a year. And so the General Assembly specifically said we had 6 months to get it through the temporary rulemaking process, so it'll become effective next year. But at the same time, we'll be taking it through the more permanent rulemaking process.
Questions for Ms. Schaefer?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Hall.
Just quickly, Attorney Schaefer, the penalty are non-monetary?
The proposed rules, the legislation does not mention monetary rules. There are provisions for the High School Athletic Association to adopt additional rules, but that's an ongoing conversation.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, this is before us today for action on first read. Ms. Schaefer, thanks to you and your team for that task. Our second item deals with our decennial rules review submission, and I'll turn to our legal specialist, Mr. Brandon Walker.
Thank you, Chair Davis. Excuse me. Good afternoon or morning, board members, Superintendent Truitt. This is going to be a real brief update. So if you remember, we've extended back in November the 60-day comment period for public comment on the rules that were deemed necessary and unnecessary. No comments were received. That 60-day period expired in the middle of January. So our next step is to approve the report that was attached to your documents. And really the only update to that report is the notation that no public comments were received for any specific rule. And then from that approval, it goes over to OAH for the Rules Review Commission meeting March 17th. And if there's any discussion there, Tom Zyko and myself will be there to answer any questions. And then it will get passed over to the Joint Legislative Administrative Procedures Review Committee for any discussion, comment. And from the point they take actions, the rules come off the books, so to speak, and then we move forward with the readoption process for the necessary rules.
Questions for Mr. Walker? Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Colleagues, are there any other items of new business? Hearing none, we'll now vote on any item requiring action from your committee reports. A thorough discussion and report has been provided on each item, including the consent items. A reminder that the items on the consent agenda are primarily not complex and have come to the board for discussion in a prior month. I note also that we've seen these consent agenda items for at least a week. So at this time, I ask if there's any request to remove an item from the consent action or action on first reading agendas. Hearing none, I request a motion to approve the following: the January 5th and 6th, 2022 meeting minutes, SLA 1 through 3 and 10 through 13, EICS 1 and 2 and 9, HRS 1, BizOp 1 through 5 and 7, ES&P 1, the proposed rules for interscholastic middle and high school athletics as presented, the decennial rules review submission as presented, the IPL and ILT licensure approval recommendations from staff, the Northampton contract revisions for our interim superintendent, Dr. Dale Burns, as presented by our legal staff, and the retirement agreement for Dr. Chamblee of Northampton County, as presented by staff. And then this following motion, as recommended by our legal counsel. I move to amend the State Board's January 6, 2022 directive that the disbursements of all federal funds under the control of Mr. Don McQueen in all schools operated by the Torchlight Academy Schools LLC be temporarily frozen during the ongoing investigation and proceedings regarding those schools. The proposed amendment is to allow DPI to use federal funds in its discretion and as appropriate and permitted under federal and state law, regulations, and grant conditions to reimburse Torchlight Academy or Three Rivers Academy at cost for any actual, allowable, necessary, and reasonable operating expenses, provided that supporting documents are submitted to DPI to support such a decision.
A second.
So I need a motion first.
I make a motion.
Thank you, Treasurer. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Second by Ms. White. Any discussion on this motion? Hearing none, Dr. Townsend Smith, we call the roll to capture the vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kimmons?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor? Lieutenant Governor? Vice Chair Duncan?
Yes.
Chair Davis?
Yes. Motion carries. Thank you to all staff and presenters for this February 3rd, 2022 meeting. This concludes our work for the day. I now ask for a motion to adjourn this February 3rd meeting.
So moved.
Motion by Dr. Oxendine. Second?
Yes.
Mr. Chair.
Second by the Treasurer. Dr. Townsend Smith.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Would you consider adjourning in honor of Paul Fulton? He was a 47-year finance officer in Forsyth County, and we know how important our county finance officers are for the funding of our public schools, who retired last month and passed away last week. His name is Paul Fulton from Forsyth County, and if you'll consider that, please.
We'd be delighted to add that to our motion to adjourn, assuming Dr. Oxendine agrees.
Absolutely.
Okay, and second by Treasurer?
Yes. Second.
Okay, then before we take action on this motion, I've received a request for one of our colleagues to have an opportunity to share some news with us. I'll turn to Mr. McKinney.
Chair Davis, may I please take a moment of personal privilege?
You have it.
As a former philosophy teacher, I taught my students that we should always be learning, as we are always growing. And the act of living, not merely existing, is to constantly re-examine one's life, to question and act. It was a classroom mantra we all shared, and when necessary, we served as reminders that the greatest of life's mission remains to find the state of eudaimonia, a state of happiness that allows you to actualize yourself at the fullest capacity. Apart from being a husband and a father and a friend and a human being, it has been my life's honor to serve the state of North Carolina and the Greater Shire, its students and schools in multiple capacities, as the North Carolina State Teacher of the Year and currently as the Director of Government and Community Affairs for the State Board of Education and the Department of Public Instruction. These roles have come with a multiplicity of experiences and opportunities and memories in the forming of partnerships that have transcended the traditional professional path and have transformed me into the educator that stands before you today, simply a man with many friends. Among those friends are many members of the General Assembly and the Department of Education and the Governor's Office, and I thank them for their collaboration. I want to thank the State Board of Education for this opportunity, for believing an educator should be at the table in the room where it happens. It is this level of leadership that continues to reflect your commitment and dedication in North Carolina public schools and all that is good about life's great equalizer, education. Thank you all for always putting the student first, for striving for an equitable access to academic opportunities and whole child support, and for epitomizing servant leadership. It has been humbling to watch and to witness. And to each individual board member and Cecilia Holden, you served as a guide and a mentor and a beacon of light for what needs our attention, but also what needs your action. Chair and Vice Chair, I could not imagine where our state would be without your leadership through a global pandemic and through the tumultuous times that your roles have served. You are steadfast but compassionate and a bulwark that protects our students and allows them to see the horizon, one of promise and hope and prosperity. And wherever you are, we will continue to go beyond normalcy. It is our calling. Deanna, you've been like a sister to me, and our path will continue, so I will not say goodbye, my friend, for you and I will meet again. And to you, State Superintendent, thank you for being a friend. Thank you for believing in my role as a part of your team's vision. It was very meaningful to be a part of this, particularly to share in a vision for bridge building and educator diplomacy that Julie Pittman and I began and Tabari Wallace and I shared. Tabari, ride or fly, brother. Julie, your partnership and friendship has been astounding, and again, our time is not over. We will continue to do great things for the students and the teachers of North Carolina together. We have plans. Furthermore, it was an unexpected joy to be brought into a team where my direct supervisor was also my former student, Shelby. There is no greater gift to a teacher than to bear witness to their students' greatness. And to the COVID warriors, many in this room and in this department, who led and are leading our school and students through an unprecedented pandemic when the night was darkest, thanks for being our lighthouses through it all. Education is soul crafting, and you are all artists at the core. So if I leave here tomorrow, would you still remember me? For I must be traveling on now, because there's too many places I've got to see. I miss being connected with the classroom, with teachers, with students. I miss supporting the opportunities to learn about this big, beautiful world, this big blue dot and all of its people. I miss focusing on global education like I did in the classroom. I miss my passion of bringing the world to my students, whether directly or literally as we hiked the Andes or swam face to face with great white sharks, stood looking up at the great ruins of the Aztecs and the Mayans, learned to scuba dive, interacted with the many cultures that cohabitate this planet, staring through the bars of the prison cell that Nelson Mandela once stood, and just learning about the many cultures that we can teach through our curriculum and then the experiences in our classroom can provide. I want our students to learn about the human story, everyone's story. So I'm happy to announce that I will be joining the team at Participate Learning and working to support teachers and school leaders and students by sharing the wonders that make up our world through global education resources and professional learning opportunities and immersion experiences and programs. You may remember Participate Learning, formerly VIF, which is a 34-year-old organization founded by a North Carolina family based in North Carolina and dedicated to North Carolina public education. I am blessed to join this teaching program that embodies my passion and my values for cultural exchange and global teacher leadership, and this will impact and continue to impact thousands of students, international students, and local educators throughout North Carolina, Virginia, Tennessee, and South Carolina. I'm honored to join a force for good and its students and schools and communities in developing global leadership through a collaborative mission of uniting the world through global learning. Because we all have a choice to be a catalyst for changing lives, and I'm thrilled to make this decision to join forces with Participate Learning and all of you in our commitment to empowering our state's educational system on a new and exciting journey. But this is simply just one step closer on my path to becoming a village teacher. Thank you.
Well, Mr. McKinney, the thanks are from us to you. We will certainly need to find a time in the future to more formally thank you. To be honest with you, our hearts are overflowing right now that prevent the appropriate words of expression of thanks, but we will find that time to say thank you and wish you Godspeed. Thank you, sir. So I believe that concludes our meeting. We have a motion on the floor to adjourn, and I'll turn to Dr. Townsend Smith for that vote.
Yes, sir. Dr. Oxendine?
Yes.
Ms. Kimmons?
Yes.
Mr. Keenan?
Yes.
Mr. Hall?
Yes.
Dr. Tipton Rogers?
Yes.
Ms. White?
Yes.
Mr. Ford?
Yes.
Treasurer Falwell?
Yes.
Lieutenant Governor?
Yes.
Vice Chair Duncan? Chair Davis?
Yes, motion carries. We stand adjourned. Have a good day.
Here.